Yeah, the campus is beautiful. I was a toss-up between there and St Andrews, but birds are probably one of my first passions, and the feathered variety are one of my first passions. And they've got like the BTO based at Stirling Uni. Yeah,
right, that's just live. If you could share at any point, that would be good as well, if you could.
My clockwork phone.
Right, I'm not savvy like that. I don't even have a phone. Sorry.
No, I've got. I was complaining about it, Shearsman, because it's ancient. But where are we? Facebook.
I could probably connect and do it on my laptop.
Oh, aye.
Do you need the Wi-Fi?
The Wi-Fi thing's up there on the box up there.
You talk.
Just on the top of there.
Aye.
So we're walking.
There, behind the light. We're live now.
Oh yeah.
The beginning bit was very The beginning bit was very shit.
Oh yeah, it's unfortunate, like. It's just us all sitting, no talking to each other for a while.
Connect to this net. Probably got that wrong, did I? Wait, sorry, which one? Do you know which Talk one you are? Probably the one with full. That looks
It used to only be
the
one
that
Talk.
should be a. Aye. That's all capitals as well. Yeah, you keep that in mind. Is it VJ86XRGA?
Yeah.
Got it minded, right? Cool. I'll remember that for now.
That's pathetic.
Yeah, it's pretty. No, it's fine though.
VG86, what did you say?
XRGA.
G for Juliet.
G for George. Let me see on my page as well.
So no boomerangs this time, eh?
No. Right, you should have to get as well.
Aye.
Curious now that you brought that up. I don't want to know.
Well, he answered about 6 months later.
Oh, really?
He randomly popped up on the podcast group page and gave us a link to an article. He'd clearly been him like, this is going to fucking annoy me if I didn't work out how this is done.
What is your research actually in with physics?
It's in explosives detection.
That's pretty interesting.
So using organic semiconductors that are light emitting.
Okay.
They come into contact with the explosives, the light level drops.
No way.
So we just use that to try and find landmines and LEDs and that kind of thing.
That's totally awesome. Have you got like a working product that can?
It's a prototype, aye. So it's not something that we would be putting out or anything just yet.
But,
so we would field trial it and stuff. But
no way. What an awesome thing to do. That makes a really measurable difference as well to
aye.
It's cool.
Yay, science.
Yay, science indeed.
Right, I think we're all ready.
Yeah.
We're all relaxed, we've all got fags. Craig's no sitting here, the odd one out. It's unbelievable.
When he died. I've essentially got cancer.
Aye, it's unfortunate, man. It's going to get fucking lit up in here, boy. Alright, well, might as well start. Welcome to the Besides the Norm podcast. We've got Ross Gillanders in here.
Hello.
Who's going to co-host some of the podcasts. Hopefully, if we can get them doing for some of them. We've got Craig here as well. How are you doing?
Dying.
Just dying. Aye. How's the smoke going for?
It's not new. Nobody's really started yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're
It's
all
just-
smoking.
Aye, but there's no like.
If we all tear drawn and then fucking
Make sure the
blow it all into you.
Please
Anyway,
don't. Please don't.
we've gathered today for science. It's going to be a beautiful day, man. I think. So we've got Andrew here. Andrew's going to. You want to introduce yourself? You've been on the podcast before, but if you.
Yeah, so last time I was here I was talking about my work at the Scottish Deer Centre, and this time I'm here in a personal capacity to talk about evolution, ecology, climate change, or anything else that you want to ask me about.
Probably a wee bit of scepticism at the end.
Yeah.
Because everybody here likes talking about that.
It's pretty much we pretty much end up in that direction a lot of the time anyway.
Yeah.
But so if what I could sort of start off in a kind of topical sense, we'll start off with the first science you want to talk about, or the first kind of branch of what you study.
Well, so as I say, what I study just now at uni is ecology, which is sort of the relationships of organisms to their environment, to each other, which is something I find fascinating. I like to So, I mean, biology covers a whole lot of stuff. You can start down at really small end, do things like microbiology, and some people find that fascinating, but it's not my thing. I prefer looking at much bigger organisms and things like that. So I like to go into a forest and I like to understand why we have, this species and not this species. Why do we have these trees and not these trees? And how does this thing get around? How does this make its living? And it's those connections that I find, absolutely fascinating.
Oh, yeah. So it'll be things like there's the famous thing is that if you get rid of all the flies, sort of, I can't remember exactly what. Could you explain what would happen, like if you got rid of loads of flies and stuff like that? All the flies will have to die out.
Yeah, well, I mean, the best way to look at that is, really simply, you can look at food chains. You've got an organism at the bottom. Almost always, you start off with green plants, what we call primary producers. Sometimes, it's a wee bit different, but in general, it's usually these guys. And then you get energy getting passed up through the ecosystem. So things at the top of the ecosystem rely on things at the bottom of the ecosystem to be making the energy. So if you take stuff out halfway through this chain or at the start of this chain, it's going to have knock-on effects, not only on everything above it, but usually you find it goes down the way as well. So flies is not an example I know very well, but one that I do know quite well from working at the deer centre is deer and top predators. If you get rid of the top predators, you get too many deer because there's nothing eating them, then they eat more of the grass, more of the trees, and this causes massive problems for everything below and above in the chain.
You were talking last time about putting the lynx cut back in.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating topic. So there's a big campaign to do this. There's an organisation called the Lynx UK Trust that are wanting to bring back the lynx. Their proposal is to introduce a small number, something like 5 or 6 lynx that they're hoping to take from Romania and introduce them into a forest down in the borders, a place called Calderwood. I have some reservations about the Lynx UK Trust. I think that they're very eager to point out the positives and very eager to sort of play down the negatives. I think they're maybe rushing into it. A shameless plug, but if you're really interested in this, I'd recommend looking up a guy called Chris Hetherington, who's the head ecological advisor at the Cairngorms National Park. So he wrote his PhD thesis on the lynx reintroduction and the viability of it, and he's trying to set himself up as a sort of independent expert on this, and he's very clear about that there are problems, there's definitely issues that we need to tackle and mitigate before we could ever do it, but also talks a lot about the benefits through predation on deer.
Right.
Something that's worth pointing out, because it's a wee bit different from what I was talking about with the wolves, is that the lynx aren't likely to actually affect the numbers of deer in a dramatic sense, but they may introduce something that's often called the ecology of fear, which sounds a bit horrible. We want to introduce fear into our ecology, but the idea is if you've got deer in a big deer population in a forest, they turn up to an area that's good to find food, they eat all the food that's available, they move on and there's nothing left, there's no other reason for them to move. Introduce top predators, deer will quickly work out, wait a minute, we shouldn't spend too much time grazing here because there's something that can hunt us. So the presence of these animals cause the deer to move a lot more, distribute grazing pressure a lot more evenly, and this can allow for a regeneration. So that's the argument, and in my opinion the only way to sort of know whether these arguments are going to hold up is a scientific trial where we can get some actual data and actual evidence.
Have they? Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was saying that I know that obviously people who object, people that object to it would be like your farmers and that kind of thing.
That's
so
the big ones. Yeah.
If there were deer freely running about, say I don't know how many you typically get in a forest, but say there was 20 or something. Would the lynx kind of just stick to the deer, or would they go for the more passive things like sheep?
Well, a great question, and it's definitely one of the issues, and it's a really hard question to answer because you can look at lynx in all sorts of different countries, and the predation on sheep changes dramatically. But it's all to do with the way that people farm their sheep. So, for example, in Norway, they free roam thousands of sheep every year in forests where lynx are, and they lose thousands of sheep every year to lynx. If you go to sort of places like the Carpathian Mountains or even down into the Iberian Peninsula, they have sheep, but they farm them completely differently. Up in high hills, they're watched by farmers all the time. They're nowhere near forests. Lynx won't come anywhere near them, so you get almost no predation on sheep at all. So you'll find a lot of people will say, look at Norway, they're going to eat all our sheep, and then the other people will say, well, look at the Iberian Peninsula, they're not going to eat any of our sheep. I would say that we're somewhere in the middle, and again, it's really hard to just say, well, it works like this in Norway, so it'll definitely work like this in Scotland. And we don't free roam sheep in forests, so I would definitely say Norway's a bad comparison. But then, a bit more specifically on your question, lynx everywhere in the world we find lynx and specifically roe deer living together. Lynx are considered roe deer specialists, and even in Norway where there's this massive abundance of sheep and they actually have a low population of roe deer still top of the menu. Given the odds that they're going to be going for them.
Maybe they like the chase or something then.
Yeah, there's again, this guy Chris Etherington does a lot of work on like what lynx eat in different parts of the world, and basically they go for roe deer, and if there's no roe deer they go for the next sort of medium-sized mammal. Chamois is a common one in mainland Europe.
What? A chamois?
Yeah.
What the fuck is that?
It's sort of like a sheep, big sheep. Well, not giant at all. It's sort of like a slightly bigger sheep. Yeah, giant's not fair. But yeah, so they will go for them if there's no roe deer. But yeah, everywhere in the world where you find lynx, it's roe deer that's top of the menu. So in Calder Forest, where this proposal is, they have 11 roe deer per square kilometre, which is a serious number of deer. We reckon a sort of sustainable level in our country is about 6 per square kilometre, so not far off double. Yeah.
So if you were to introduce lynx cats again, would that have anything sort of fuck about with the fox population as well? Would that have anything to do with that at all?
Yeah, that's a totally amazing question, because this is ecology at its finest. So
look at you! I knew he was going to do that as well.
My favourite subject here. But so a lot of the concern is, as we say, the predation of lynx on sheep. This is causing a lot of people concern. However, the sheep, foxes predate on sheep a lot more than lynx do. And the way that lynx hunt, so they will say kill a roe deer, they'll come back, they'll leave it where it is, sometimes cover it up and bury it, and they come back to it over maybe 3 or 4 days. This will keep them fed. Foxes are also very big scavengers, so they come into these carcasses, they try and scavenge the lynx food, but the lynx turns up again, isn't very happy with the fox stealing its food, so will often kill the fox as well. So again, back to David Hetherington, but he was showing that after these animals, like the roe deer, foxes are the third most common prey of a lynx. So the effect that lynx are going to have in a fox population and reducing fox numbers is going to have a knock-on effect on sheep populations. So if you follow me, even if the lynx are taking some of the sheep, if they're reducing the fox dramatically, and that's having less of an effect on sheep, it's still a net benefit. So there's lots of things to look at.
Because is that not the reason that the Conservatives kind of bring up fox hunting and stuff like that? That they're a danger to sort of farm and wildlife and stuff like that.
I would be inclined to agree. It's one of the only times you're ever going to hear me say I agree with the Tories. I think there is too many foxes. And in my opinion, that's because we've taken away a lot of their competition. And it's we work on a thing in ecology called carrying capacity, which is basically how many of a certain species can be supported in a certain area. If you take away competition, you increase availability of food by having bins everywhere, things like that. Carrying capacity of foxes goes up, the population gets bigger. So if you want to reduce it, personally, I think a better way is to introduce natural balance to your ecology, bring back natural predators, bring back competition. But if you're not going to do that, I think controlling the numbers in some other way is basically essential. A wee bit counterintuitive, but it's not in the interest of foxes. Same with deer, it's not in the interest of these animals to have massive populations. So reducing them actually benefits those animals as well. Again, in my opinion.
Okay,
excellent.
So just locally, I've noticed in Anstruther and St Andrews and that kind of area, there's not that many foxes that I've seen.
Okay.
Compared to like growing up in Paisley, you would see them all the time in the streets. You know what I mean? So, is there a reason for that, or am I just not seeing them?
It's probably a bit of both. So in places like Paisley, you'll get these urban foxes that lose the sort of nocturnal behaviours, lose their fear of humans, are much more happy to come out and in the open. In areas where they're not got that confident, they might be a bit more frightened to come out, and seeing them might be a bit harder.
Sure. But
there might also be differences in numbers. To be honest, I couldn't tell you how many foxes are around.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I see more dead badgers on the road than I do foxes.
Yeah,
it's to me, it's an unusual lack of these animals. I think even maybe bigger urban centres like Dundee and that kind of thing, you would still see them, but
so I wouldn't be able to tell you how badger numbers and fox numbers compare in Fife. I'm afraid I couldn't give you an accurate number there.
I was just going to say, we've kind of got the same problem here. We never sort of see fox. I've never seen a badger, for instance. I've never seen any of them roaming about. But we've got like tons of fields down there. We're all absolutely fucking covered everywhere. We never see any of these animals.
If you've got lots of fields and there's sort of woodland area anywhere nearby, there's a very good chance you might have badgers. The best way to find them is to walk around the perimeter of the field and look for a bit in the fence that's been pushed up. It's got hair on it. Because badgers often have like paths that they follow. So if you find that they'll be eating earthworms, they'll be going to fields. This is where they usually forage for their food. You'll be able to find the bit in the fence where they've come through, and then you'll be able to follow a path, and you can follow that back to basically where they are. It's an interesting way to find them.
So it makes sense that for living in an area like this, there's no reason to see foxes. They've got plenty of space to be.
Yeah, and like most animals are going to hear, see and smell you guys coming before we've got any idea where they are, and they've got this fear and they're going to be heading away from us. So I always think foxes are very underrated animals. You know, I think a lot of people get used to seeing these scabby urban foxes. So you get things like mange are really common. They've lost this fear of people, so they get themselves in, you know, awkward situations, going into people's houses, threatening babies, things like that. And you get this horrible press. But if you're ever out in the countryside and you're sitting quietly and you're lucky enough to come across something like a big healthy dog fox hunting, looking for its food, I think it's one of the best sights you can see in our country. You know, I think they're beautiful animals and extremely intelligent in the way that they look for food and things like that is fascinating stuff.
You headed a place in Japan that's like full of foxes. I don't know if it's a fox island or a fox park.
I've not.
But you go in and there's just an overabundant population of foxes. They've also got an island for cats as well. They just get an island of like domesticated cats in Japan. Of course they do.
Not surprised.
They've got like cat shops in Japan and everything as well. But it was interesting in the fox place that really kind of. There's like a bunch of YouTube videos and stuff about it. It's pretty cool.
So it's literally just a big
just a big huge park area, but there's just tons of obviously over domesticated foxes. There's tons of people there. They're always coming up to people for feed a lot of the time. They're no scared whatsoever at all. But it's pretty interesting. Loads of different kind of coloured foxes and that as well.
Cool.
Different kind of cool stuff, man.
We often try and discourage people from feeding foxes when we're talking about them in the park for lots of reasons. The most basic one is if you're living in a house, you're not going to be there for like all your days. If you start feeding a fox family in the back garden and they start to like rely on you feeding them and then you move away, then that fox family is, you know, in a bit of trouble. But there's also issues about them, you know, socialising, getting more comfortable around people, which can lead to problems for them and it can lead to awkward situations. So we would usually say don't feed foxes in your back garden. If you're a wee old lady and you're in a house and you're never going to move, it's probably not doing any harm at all. But
I suppose
you're gonna, if you're an old one, you're going to die soon.
that's one way to look at it. Well, that's a good point actually, because I was just saying if you're going to stop feeding them, so if you die, you're probably going to stop feeding them.
Probably.
So even old women don't feed foxes. Retract my previous comment.
Let's go into a mental scenario that I just thought of as you were talking. Let's introduce 6 families of bears down at the field there. How many people in Kennewy get killed?
Don't know. With a lot of the animals that we're considering reintroducing, lynx, wolves, I spend a lot of my time trying to convince people they are nowhere near as dangerous as a lot of people make out.
That's it.
This doesn't really apply to bears. Bears are completely different. Bears are, tend to be the biggest, fiercest thing in the environment. They don't have the same level of fear. They're extremely intelligent and extremely curious. So you go to places like America and they come wandering into towns and things like that. So a wolf smells you on the wind, it's going to head the other direction. A bear smells you on the wind, it might be like, oh, that smells tasty, I'm going to see what's over there.
Definitely.
But as much as I love bears, I kind of draw the line there. I don't think I don't think we're likely to ever see them back.
Did we have them in Scotland?
Yeah, very roughly.
Years ago, I heard that. Bears as well, seemingly. Was that not true?
Yeah, bears. Sorry, that's what I was talking about.
That's right. Oh yeah, totally.
So very roughly about 1,000 years ago for bears. Again, very roughly about 1,500 years ago for lynx. So lynx were actually gone before the bears.
I didn't realise that.
It's really interesting. I don't know exactly why. It's been explained to me in the past before that bears would be controlled when they're a problem, whereas lynx, there was a lot of money involved in hunting them for their pelts, things like this. So there was an industry around hunting and killing lynx, whereas not so much with bears.
I imagine a bear fleece or whatever we call it would be quite useful back then for clothing.
Yeah, probably
would. These big heavy like Viking style things.
I'm guessing a trade-off between usefulness of the pelt and danger involved in getting it. So again, I don't know if this is entirely accurate, but that's the way it's been described to me before as an explanation.
Are lynx dangerous to humans?
As far as I'm aware, there's never been a recorded instance of a healthy lynx attacking a human in the wild.
Right.
There could be, I just don't know about it.
But if they did, they would kick your cunt in. Surely.
They would kick your cunt in.
Technical terms. They are pretty powerful animals. They're fantastic hunters. Individually compared to some other animals, they're fantastic. Something that's really curious about the way that they hunt is a lot of animals go for the weak, the ill, the old, things like this, especially wolves. Where you can be a buck in the prime of your life wandering around a forest and a lynx will take you out. They don't really go for the old, the ill. They're just fantastic predators. So they could be a danger. but way more scared. It's total cliche, but way more scared of us than we are of them.
Oh,
so secretive. I mean, we have lynx at the park where I work, and we go in with the lynx on a regular basis. Every other day we're in there. Same with wolves, we go in with them. We don't have to have them on another side of a barrier. You can go in, and as long as you're sensible, you're fine. Bears is a completely different issue. You never go in with bears. You can't be in the same section with them.
Are bears the only ones you didn't go in with? Or is there
only ones that are zero contact? The other big risk that we have is actually 2 species of deer, which a lot of people get surprised at. So, dangerous animals license, top of the list is bears, and then it's the 2 species of elk. So moose, North European elk, moose are just titans. A great way to highlight how massive they are is a fully grown adult brown bear. Our boy Loki, about 350 kilograms. Mickey, our male moose, is 8.5 foot tall, 620 kilograms.
Jesus.
60 centimetre radar emissions in his head. He stands and he just.
Oh, if he charges at you, you're dead.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And again, it's a behavioural thing. So with most deer, you frighten a deer. What deer do is they run. That's what they're good at. They get out of there, get out of dodge. Moose is the biggest thing in town. Nothing mess. Even bears don't mess with a big adult moose. If you piss off Mickey, he kicks you until you stop being.
I've seen that before. Actually, bears sort of going, "Oh, fuck this."
Yeah, we'd not risk that. And then North American elk, which are very much like our red deer, they're not connected to moose, or they're very loosely connected to moose. But again, attitude problem. They're the ones you see in Yellowstone National Park with a really white bum. Native American name is wapiti, which means white arse, which I think is a great definition for them. But again, attitude problem. Just batter you if you're on the wrong side of them.
Have you seen this nonsensical picture? It's about a pack of wolves, and the idea is that the leader is right at the back of the pack of wolves, and at the front 3 wolves are the old or injured, and then the rest of them is like the 3 at the front are just behind the injured, they're protecting the deer, and then the 3 at the back are protecting the rest of the sort of mediocre wolves.
Okay.
Have you seen this?
No, I haven't. Wolf packs are fascinating. So you're in a wolf
But
pack.
apparently it turned out to be bullshit. Because you're the sort of person that'd be like, oh, that's nonsense.
So with a wolf pack, you tend to find that alphas are the dominant. You always have an alpha pair, alpha male and alpha female. They're the only breeding individuals in the pack. The rest of the pack are all made up of their offspring, so they're all related. You often find that the alphas are sort of, when it comes to hunting, they will be hanging back a little bit. It's not always the case, but often what we call beta wolves, who are maybe mature youngsters who are a wee bit more dominant than the others, they tend to be heavily involved in patrolling, fighting, attacking, catching prey.
Right.
But then the alpha comes along and he eats first, he or she eats first, and then it works its way right down to omega wolves, who are sort of the new addition to the team, the youngest wolves. So there is a lot of sort of hierarchy, and hierarchy is very important in the wolf pack, but I'm not sure about specific roles quite to that extent anyway.
It was an interesting thing. I was curious if you'd come across it before.
Not something I'm aware of, no.
You got an opinion on the sort of the fear stories about because we're starting to get hotter as a country, that we're starting to get more venomous spiders able to live here? And
is this because of the false widow thing coming out? I take it.
Well, it's because of that, but that's only able to go up in numbers because it's starting to get hotter.
Right.
Again, I'm not particularly familiar with a specific case, but that is definitely something that happens. Mosquitoes is another famous one, and it's allowing the spread of malaria carrying mosquitoes to the environments that are suitable for them are expanding, so they're expanding as well, which can often have a problem with the spread of disease and things like that. So it's definitely a real concern, one of many with climate change.
Push this forward a wee.
Sorry.
I've noticed like more exotic looking spiders in Fife than I ever did in Glasgow,
Right.
And but having said that, again, I grew up in a very urban environment and all that. Yeah. And I remember, in Anstruther, I went to the corner shop, and the woman that works there, her husband's from Glasgow, she was always kind of taking the piss out of me a wee bit. And I said to her, and that morning I'd found this spider in my house, and it was kind of had this orangey translucent skin. Right, which I'd never seen.
I've seen one of these kind of things. Aye.
Apparently they are poisonous to the extent that if it bit you, it would be like a mosquito bite or something. It wouldn't kill you or anything, but you would get a red bump in your skin or whatever. But I was going in there to buy something anyway. I said, that's like a spider earlier. I've never seen it before in my life, And she goes, we're from Glasgow. You've only got the daft wee house spiders, eh? So I suppose so.
Wee hardy wee spiders, man.
So these are all these field spiders apparently coming down, because again, Anstruther, you've got the fields, a few streets, and then the sea,
Totally,
so it's
are these spiders bigger or weird?
They're pretty wee. They're probably the size of a 1 pence piece or something.
Well, that's
And they're
fine.
like the wee garden spiders with like the wee ball
Well,
at the bottom.
I'd rather have a wee spider that could give me a red bump than a big spider that wouldn't touch me. Because fuck big spiders, by the way. Scary looking fuckers.
We watched a video with a camel spider. Because
A camel spider's technically not a spider, just to confuse the whole issue. Yeah,
Oh, fuck off.
it's a type of arachnid, but it's not a spider. It's got
Right, well-
different body parts. So
So what is it then?
Shit.
it's type of arachnid. Yeah. I don't
Oh, they're
know
just a
what
type
it
of-
is,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our cousin was away in Iraq, fighting the war, fighting the good fight, as we'll say. And they were told loads of sort of scare stories about camel spiders that they would cut your leg off and everything like that.
Yeah.
Like they had some sort of swords with them or something like that. But they were just told loads of scare stories about these things, and we watched one fighting a scorpion.
Aye.
There's a YouTube channel dedicated to camel spiders fighting other animals, which is great. Throwing
But yeah,
a throwing a
dog fighting's
badger.
illegal.
Yeah.
We can make
Aye.
camel spiders fight.
Right, totally.
We
Aye.
can't make dog fight.
So how big are these things?
Nah, I'm joking.
Roughly the size of a
What?
camel. Yeah.
I would say about the size of the glass, maybe. Like if it was
they're pretty
leg
big.
down.
The legs sticking
Oh yeah,
They're
with
not
legs
as big as
sticking
a
and everything.
huntsman.
Right.
But
okay.
presumably, you've been on Facebook long enough that you've seen the huntsman
The
video.
thing in the corner of the room.
Aye.
It's like takes up
thing
the
in-
whole room. It's like,
Apparently a thing in Manchester where they had to phone the fire brigade and it took like 6 men to battle this beast and all this pish. It's nonsense.
with axes and
But
shit.
they are they're like the size of a medium-sized bird. They're fucking huge.
Fuck
That's
that.
pretty crazy.
But one of the stories we got told about this camel spider, nonsense, is that a guy came back from Afghanistan and he had accidentally brought a camel spider back with him. And he woke up one night and he's dug. Fucking shit! It's a humongous lie. I don't even understand why you would try and lie that
I'm
much.
just imagining a guy woke up to like a big fat camel spider just sitting beside
Aye.
blood away it and everything. Just
Dog shaped in the front.
But I just some of these scare stories. The spiders fucking scared me to death enough. So it's just I just mings me out,
It's
man.
funny how
Hate
many
it.
people are, scared of them. I think it's, an evolutionary thing. Snakes as well. You're sort of pre-programmed or hardwired to
Absolutely
get
fine
away
with
to
snakes.
that.
You're a bit different. Man.
I've got a rational fear of snakes.
Yeah, so spider, it is rational to be cautious about these things. I find it. I work again with a lot of kids. We often do things like bug hunts and stuff in the forest. And in my experience, the fear of spiders, and less so with snakes, but definitely with spiders, is a learned behaviour. They see everybody being scared of it and think I should be scared. You get a spider and you let it crawl over you, and you get these kids like, actually, that's that's
that.
not a problem. And if you tackle it at an early age, you can get a lot of people to be a lot more comfortable holding animals like this.
It's a weird thing. I used to be able to handle the fucking wee things, and my granddad was in a holiday in Blairgowrie. There's a big caravan park up there, and he got bitten by a wee wolf spider. I say wee. It was about this fucking size.
Well, is that indigenous as well? A wolf
I
spider?
think so. I think that's what they are.
Again,
Is it a wolf spider or is it just?
It was a big brown. It was a big
Because
brown.
Dad called it a
brown
wolf
thing.
spider.
Well, that's it. It was a big brown thing.
Yeah,
Right,
so
okay.
in my understanding, this could be completely wrong, is that wolf spider is a category of spider. So a wolf spider is a type of
Right.
spider who gets its prey by running after it and hunting it, as opposed to having a trap.
I recognised that shape you were doing there. That's the one. Whoa.
So I don't think that a wolf spider is a species name.
Right.
I think it's like a type of spider.
Because I know there is a species of spider called a house spider.
Yeah, again, I'm not.
Which
not
is,
expert here, could well
Just
be.
lazy
Yeah.
spiders, just fucking awful
Aye.
ones.
Well, so, I mean, in fact, Lemmy had a video or a Vine or something where he had a spider crawl out his mouth. Did you see that
Oh,
one?
no.
Caught it.
And I will be fucking avoiding Lemmy for now on if that ever happens again.
I think the thing about spiders as well is like to be scared of it when you look at it. The spider's face, as a human, you don't have anything in common with it.
Yeah.
No, aye.
Compared to say a bear, which looks like a big cute dog or something, even though you could rationally be scared of a bear, a spider has nothing. You don't have anything in common with it. It's like looking at an alien or something,
Yeah.
Totally
which
agree.
might be a kind of as you say, an evolutionary kind of.
Yeah, that's not one of us.
Presumably you're alright with spiders then.
Yeah, quite.
You got
fan.
spiders up at the deer set on that as well.
We've got a red leg tarantula.
So
called
we're
Belle.
not going to the
Oh
deer
yeah, no gone.
You don't have to hold her, but it's great fun. The biggest problem that you have with her is if you sort of disturb her or annoy her, she's tarantula, she fires hairs off at you, kicks them off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they can sort of irritate your eyes, and they're not going to do anything dramatic to you, but they can be irritating and annoying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that stun prey then when they're out in the wild?
I think it's more of a defence. So if something's going to eat them, kick loads of stuff into their face and run.
So they didn't bite tarantulas, do they?
They can, yeah.
They can.
Never been bitten by a bell, but I've been told it's like a wasp sting. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Spiders cast, so when they're getting bigger, they come out of their skin, leave
Aye.
sheds behind. They leave the fangs behind, and they're quite big things. So they're quite interesting.
Oh, they leave the fangs behind?
Yeah. So I've got a whole box of Bell's casts. I wish I'd brought it with me now.
You're fine.
No, you're alright.
You can turn it upside down. You can see these fangs sticking out, and they're quite impressive things.
So.
You seem to be alright with this. You seem bothered, but
I'm okay with spiders. I mean, I'm a reluctant slayer of spiders sometimes at home. It's my wife hates them, but I think they're alright, and like they should be keeping the house free of kind of flies and things, shouldn't they? So I'm quite happy to let them crawl about.
Spiders are our allies.
Yeah, exactly.
frogs are my allies.
Yeah,
Because apparently, if you got rid of all the frogs, there'd be a shitload of spiders everywhere.
Oh, there
You wouldn't be able to move
Sure, aye.
So let's protect the frogs.
Aye. There's a wee pond.
All the frogs are fucked because of climate change. But
Let's save the climate.
There's a wee pond in there. It's probably the same everywhere. I don't know what kind of frogs they are, but anytime we go down, there's just that wee pond there, my side pond. Neighbour near my side, different story. When you go down there, it's only like within a couple of days when they're sort of hatching, sort of thing.
Okay.
Hatching's probably a shit word.
Spawning.
But there's fucking millions of the wee things
Right.
bolting about.
This is
There.
frogs.
Aye, frogs, aye.
Now, there used to be times where we used to go down on a sort of a moist day, and you'd look under the old shit and you'd try and find frogs. But if you went down to Marside Pond, you had like a week, and it would just be frogs just somewhere about everywhere, just hundreds of the fucking wee bastards.
Hundreds and thousands of them, and you'd I've probably killed about 100 when I was there, just standing on them.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It's like they have so many young.
Aye.
Loads of them that die.
Amazing. So you say they were a bit like sort of close to dying out, or?
Not frogs in our country. The big problems in South America, but there's lots of problems with amphibians in general, and the change of this sort of temperature pattern is allowing different things to get into the environment. So there's a type of fungal infection that basically stops frogs being able to take up nutrients through their skin, which is really important to the way that frogs do things, and it's killing out frogs en masse. So there's a famous story about golden tree frogs in South America, and dying. They're if you want to look at the effects of climate change that are happening right now, a lot of it's happening in frogs, and they're having or amphibians in general, they're having a bit of a hard time of it just now. And things are likely to get worse. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely, aye.
Or it doesn't exist.
Sure.
Climate change doesn't exist. So
sorry to say, it definitely does. Yeah. As far as you can be certain about anything.
So
I would say,
just because, in the interest of being fair, we've been asked to ask this question. So
It's a great switch to climate change as well. It's
We'll
perfect.
ask the
Beautiful.
question. The idea that it's man-made, is it possible that has been exaggerated significantly, and is it possible that the effects of climate change are being greatly exaggerated as well?
Definitely possible, but I would say that the balance of evidence suggests otherwise. A term that I think is great for topics like this is a consilience of evidence. It's not, well, my evidence shows this and your evidence shows this. It's the vast majority of evidence from different fields and from different techniques all are converging in the same sort of answer, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think there's very strong evidence that. I think that it's a step-by-step thing. So again, a lot of people get caught up in, right, what's the one single bit of evidence you could give me that shows that humans are affecting climate is going to be bad? Well, there's nothing. There's no one single bit of evidence that shows you that. There's a whole picture that you have to build up. There's evidence from different angles, different routes into looking at it, and the picture is becoming quite clear. So different ways to look at. So I would say you can easily see that the greenhouse effect is being increased. So you can measure it in two ways. You can measure the amount of outgoing long wave radiation that's leaving the planet. You can see if there's any trends in that, and they can show quite clearly that there's a reduction in the specific wavelengths that are absorbed by carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So they can see there's less energy escaping the atmosphere in that specific wavelength. This should cause warming. You can then look at, at the surface, you can measure downwards reflected radiation, and you can show that, again, it's specifically attributable to CO2, there's an increase in the downwards reflected radiation. So this is, building up this pattern. So we can say quite confidently that there is an increase in the greenhouse effect. So you could then argue, well, maybe it's not us that's causing that. We are producing a lot of carbon dioxide, but maybe natural factors are what's leading this increase. So often volcanism or ocean outgassing are the two culprits. But you can see quite clearly that it is us through something called the Seuss effect, which is a great way to look at it. So you get isotopes, which are sort of different forms of a chemical element, fossil fuel. So you get three types of carbon: carbon 12, carbon 13, and carbon 14. Carbon 14 is radioactive, it's not stable, so it decays over a certain amount of time. I think it's something like 5,000 years roughly for its half-life. So fossil fuel's really, really old, so you would expect it to be depleted in C14 because it's been buried so long that the C14 would have all disappeared basically. Plants preferentially take up lighter C12, so photosynthesis involves taking in carbon dioxide. Lighter stuff's easier for plants to take up. So if you look at the atmospheric reservoir and you look at the reservoir in plants, there's a lower ratio of C12 to C13. So I'm getting a wee bit complicated here, but
no, that's fine. It's fine.
Basically, fossil fuel, carbon dioxide from fossil fuels is depleted in both C13 and C14. You can then look at the atmospheric pool, measure the ratio of C12 to C13 to C14, and the change is what we would expect from adding a source that's depleted in both of these, if you follow.
I don't
know.
No.
Probably badly.
It's good to have that out there because
yeah.
Obviously, if you simplify stuff, you're not getting right to the point.
Yeah.
So it's good to have that idea.
You could pause and listen back.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to need to do a few times.
Aye.
Three key isotopes. We would expect a certain pattern to come out if we were adding a source that's depleted in two of them. We can then look at the atmospheric reservoir and confirm that observation. We can see the change is exactly what we would have expected if it was from fossil fuels. And natural sources wouldn't necessarily be depleted in both of these. So you can rule out things like volcanic outgassing and ocean outgassing because they would match the same pattern.
So just out of curiosity, you didn't study in this field. How much of that did you keep up with that?
Yeah, it was okay. That was okay for me. So I mean, maybe a kind of an analogy would be looking at I don't know, like paleontology or something like that, where you expect when you get the layers of rock, that's when you can look down and see what was present in the atmosphere at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at something like the ratio of these different types of carbon, you can see where this has been introduced into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Through the design.
Yeah, very much.
Simplify it a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Definitely.
So again, to clarify, I didn't agree with this person, but I need to
ask questions. We're just going to.
I need to ask what they've been asked. Is it possible that the evidence that you're putting forward is only there because the scientists involved in the studies are worried about getting the grant stopped and they're worried about other funding issues when it comes to that?
Again, possible, but we're back to this idea of consilience of evidence. So the evidence for climate change is not just from climatologists; it's from all sorts of different fields of science, and some of them are directly competing with climate science for funding. So it's not in their interest to say, actually, climate change is a real thing. If they were wanting to increase their grant money, they'd be saying, don't bother studying that. It's more important that you study what I'm interested in. So I would say it's extremely unlikely. We can't rule that out, but we're getting into the realms of Occam's razor. What's more likely that this evidence is real, or that all the scientific establishments that agree with it are in on some sort of I know where I think the most likely answer is there. So if you want to claim that they're in some sort of conspiracy theory, or that they're all colluding to get the evidence to look like a concise pattern, I'm going to need to see some evidence. Yeah.
At this point, also, I would imagine that if anybody was going to have the money to buy scientists, it would be oil barons and it would be gas companies and it would be all these people.
Nobody's buying us.
But that's what I mean. If they've got the money,
scientist here, yeah.
There you go.
I know. But I'm talking about a dash, you know what I mean?
There you go, Ross. How much would it take to buy you?
To buy me?
Aye.
To say that climate change was fake? I don't know. I mean,
£1 million.
$1 million, yeah.
I was waiting.
That's the thing.
I was waiting on you just saying, "Fuck no, there's nothing, zero."
What's that? It's maybe an apocryphal quote where about was it Winston Churchill or Groucho Marx or somebody talking about saying to a woman, how much would you spend for you to spend the night with me? And she goes, I don't think there's enough money. And he says, well, what kind of woman do you think I am? He says, well, we've already established that we can. That's kind of what I just did there, But no, I mean, I think the thing, with conspiracies in general, with climate change, even to somebody who isn't a climate scientist or even a scientist at all, you can just see that the evidence is there.
Yeah.
But this idea of getting potentially millions of people to successfully keep this secret just makes zero sense.
No.
You know, I bet if I told the microphone, if I told the three of you a secret, it would be out by tomorrow. You know, and that's something with 4 people. You can't expect millions and millions or thousands and thousands of scientists to.
We've already seen how politicians are quite stupid and leave fucking USB sticks on trains and stuff like that.
White House couldn't keep it secret that
exactly.
got head in the Oval Office. Never mind, you know, that they were in on some international conspiracy.
That's another reason why I didn't understand the flat Earth thing.
Right.
There's governments that hate each other that are agreeing to keep this idea that the world is flat for no fucking reason either.
So you've got to then assume Russia and America have been working together for years, and you know, what does that imply? You know, there's a whole lot more stuff. You've just got to start widening this conspiracy theory to take in every bit of evidence that seems like it's going to conflict. Special pleading, I'll wave my hand. That's not a problem. They're in on the conspiracy. The guys in black suits took away that evidence.
But I was saying to the lads last week, like, see, the flat Earth is one theory, but I can't understand why it exists.
Yeah.
What's the bottom kind of line, or what's the outcome? I mean, I can understand oil barons putting out a conspiracy about climate change being fake because there's something in it for them. But flat Earth, I can't see there being anything in it for it. Yeah.
Maybe overly generalising, but is it often religious people that have that? You know, is it consistent with the Bible? Can't say
I think it is, because the Bible says there's 2 references to flat Earth. One is the corners of the earth thing that you hear people saying of it. Obviously, the Bible introduces a lot of idioms into the language, and there's another one about being under the firmament, which is what the flat Earth people say is like we're underneath a big giant contact lens. So obviously, when the Bible was written by the committee, they thought the Earth was flat because they were stupid back then. They just were quite ignorant.
But science, was it no a scientific thing that Earth wasn't flat at that time?
Well, I think the ancient Greeks kind of realised that the Earth was not flat. Again, my history isn't great, but they definitely they had made some measurements and some predictions of the stars based on the Earth being round, and they were correct. And then even like back in, I know the early Arabs, like in the maybe 5th century or something, they did a lot of mathematics, a lot of algebra, a lot of astronomy, and figured out a lot of this stuff as well. And even you look at things like the ancient Aztecs, they could predict you call them eclipses and things like that, which can only exist with a spherical body, you know. But I don't know. I think a lot of flat earthers must be at it. There's no way that there's this many flat earthers.
There's also the attraction to contrarianism. You know, it's like everybody thinks the Earth is round. Well, sack that. I think it's flat, and that's enough to have.
What did you say the word was? Edgelord.
Edgelord. An old school edgelord. Not a few of them. They just try the best. Yeah. Somebody accepts. A lot of people accept one thing. They're just like, nah, it's bullshit. Just so they could just fucking poke it.
We ken quite a few of these people closely. It's like anything. Someone comes up. Guaranteed within about 10 minutes they're like, no, wasn't that, definitely wasn't that, straight away. And they've had fucking people go to bar them and stuff for just different reasons. When
it comes to me, I think you've got to look at what explains the observations best. So if there's an official explanation or an explanation that's supported by a lot of evidence and it explains all the observations that we know of, if somebody wants to say that's bullshit, they can't just look for holes in the explanation and say therefore my new solution is right. They have to present a coherent narrative that explains the observation as well as the model that we've got just now at the very least. And if you want to completely replace the model we've got just now, there has to be something that it can explain that my model doesn't explain. You know what I mean? So just saying, oh, that's not right because there's this one hole in it that doesn't seem to make sense. There's going to be holes in everything. There's always anomalies in everything that you look at. But you need to have this coherent narrative. You'll be able to replace the current model with observations, explanations, evidence. It's not just enough to be a contrarian, in my view.
You get that a lot with evolution creationists. Do that a lot.
God of the gaps type stuff.
Exactly.
Or the evolution thing doesn't work, so obviously God made the earth and everything in it. There's no link there. You've no made any link. You've just made a very bad attempt at debunking something that you didn't understand.
So you've found a hole in my explanation and substituted your entire model in, full hog, and not applied the same rigour to that. So you've said, oh, there's this one hole here that's a problem, therefore God did everything. You're like, well, what about all the holes there? No, we're not talking about those holes. Yeah.
You get that with the Big Bang as well. This kind of idea that we don't know really what was before it.
The Big Bang, that's a fucking thing we've not spoken about before.
Did we not ask this? Have we never asked this?
Possibly. Well, maybe not. I mean, I know we talked.
I can't believe we fucking asked that. What a ridiculous.
We talked about Lawrence Krauss before, this universe from nothing.
All right, aye.
I don't know if we talked about the Big Bang. I mean, I'm not a cosmologist or anything like this, but I've had conversations with creationists before where it was this kind of, what was before the Big Bang? And I'm like, I don't know, And well, it must have been God then. I don't know. I find that harder to imagine than there being absolutely nothing, which is admittedly quite a kind of abstract concept.
There's also the philosophical argument that there was nothing before the Big Bang because it doesn't exist. Because time didn't exist until the Big Bang happened.
Yeah, so what
but still, I think that's still kind of also a bit of a cop out, maybe.
I think
because surely something had to. I didn't understand time really either.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you talk about nothing, I mean, what do you mean by nothing?
Oh, no, we're getting
into the. So this is what Krauss got a lot of.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I mean, if you're talking about, and I don't mean this in a philosophical sense, what is nothing? I mean, physically, what is nothing? Right. So if I say what's between my hands here, right, you would say there's nothing. But I mean, obviously, there's oxygen, there's the various gases, nitrogen, cigarette smoke. There's all sorts of things, right? You take that away, what have you got? You still got vacuums, you still have radio waves going through them, and all these various things, gravitational waves. There's always something there, and I think that the bottom line of the Krauss thing was kind of nothing is inherently unstable, and you have a lot of potential energy, compared to kinetic energy, which is what the Big Bang would be.
Krauss's book is well worth reading, and I am definitely not a physicist, and a lot of it is hard to follow, but I reckon the way that he writes it, it is sort of engaging, even if you're not a physicist and don't understand everything that he's talking about. I think he's very clear at explaining it, and you can follow along even if you're not following everything he's saying. You can make sense of his argument, and you can hear that his argument is, again in my opinion, coherent. It's it follows from each other. There is a structure to it. So I would definitely, is Universe for Nothing that we're talking about. Yeah.
I've no heard, read, or I tend to listen to audiobooks because reading's boring.
You can get the whole thing on YouTube.
Oh, could you?
Yeah, you can get audiobooks and stuff as well.
I've got Audible, and I've got one book from Lawrence Krauss that I've listened to a few times because it took a few times to understand what he was talking about.
Star Trek by any chance?
Maybe it might have been.
That's I'm pretty sure that was his first one. He got really famous for that. Yeah. But Lawrence Krauss is, an active researcher as well, and he's the leader, or he set up Origins project, and that's very interesting to do with evolution, that we're going to talk about as well.
Works with the Doomsday Clock as well.
Did he? I didn't realise that.
That's right. Yeah.
But I like Krauss's style very much.
He's a prick, isn't he?
Yeah,
he's like, in a good way.
For fools lately, yeah. And I'm also a big fan of Dawkins, which is very similar. The two of them are quite good friends. Yeah. But is it The Unbelievers or something?
The Unbelievers. I watched that.
But again, a lot of people, their attitude can grate on them, and they're often seen as arrogant.
Yeah, I went right off Dawkins, man. I can't stand him anymore.
Oh, no.
It was just Twitter patter that just.
Yeah. Okay.
Although he was on a Channel 4 with Jon Snow, and he was talking about how his lack of understanding of technology, so he can't comprehend that people are seeing it instantly and not understanding so he's like, that's got me in trouble a few times. I need to work on that. But
did he start off nice and just got to the point where he was like, oh fuck it now? Actually,
I think he's always been a bit psychopathic in the way he speaks, maybe.
Because I've done that a few times. I used to fucking sit and argue with people about certain things, and now I'm just like, I can't be fucking bothered. Just shut up.
Well, Dawkins, if you read some of his early stuff and his books about evolution and biology, again, in my opinion, I think there's some of the best ways to learn about the basics.
No, they're very good books. Yeah. I mean,
he like you're saying with Twitter is not his format. If you ever read any of the arguments he put forward in his book, he spends the first half of the chapter outlining his logic, what he's doing, how he's using words, what he means when he says these things. So a 400 or 500 page book is where Dawkins is at his best. You get him in a 50 character thing. He hasn't got the space or the time to explain the way he's using the words, what he's meaning.
You find that with a lot of social media. It's no the platform for some people. It's too quick to the point a lot of the time.
That's it. Yeah. He also doesn't seem to be able to handle. I mean, people take the piss out of him all the time, and I'm not talking about creationists that are having a go at him. People just kind of taking the piss out of his terrible patter.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to get that they're taking the piss either. You know, and it just becomes this vortex of cringeworthy.
There's been sort of best of Dawkins videos where an audience will laugh because he said something that came across funny to them, and he doesn't understand the humour in it, and so he starts sort of like, what's funny? Like, calm the fuck down. Like, it's
one of my favourites is he was talking about he saw two dogs having 69. He phrased it like that. I once saw a dog and a bitch have a full on 69. Talking about the fact that fruit flies do it or something. Okay. Somebody did like an oil painting of him thinking about it. Big fight bubble like that with two dogs in it, you know.
I've always loved the kind of people that they've just no sense of humour sort of thing. Right. They didn't really understand what they are making people.
Do you reckon Dawkins would be a bit autistic?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know.
Because he's old enough that he might have missed the diagnosis.
You know, autism's a spectrum, and everybody's on it somewhere. It's just, you know, some people are much more to the what we consider autistic end of it, and there might be some element to that. I've got no idea.
I think again, what might be quite likely is the fact that he grew up. He's from quite a privileged background. Like he's from quite a rich background, and he was born in I think then known as Rhodesia, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I mean,
Africa anyway.
That was quite a segregated country back then, you know, because he had that Cecil Rhodes that was named after him, and he was a horrendous racist. Right. I mean, anyway, so I mean, Dawkins grew up obviously in this kind of colonial atmosphere. Then he went to Oxford and all that. So somebody like him, and then he became a professor quite young and stuff. Somebody like him's been quite sheltered from a lot of things, you know, including I think a lot of maybe your average Joe in the street. He probably has not encountered many average Joes in the street. You know,
I agree with that. And to be honest, I hadn't actually thought about that angle in it before. But
he was very. I mean, I had an argument with him on Twitter prior to the independence referendum. You know,
right?
And he said something like, "There's a few folk that had really bogging arguments." His was something to do with, it's my country too. You know, this very, very colonial attitude. And I was like, no, it's not your country, you know. But anyway, he was like, no, but
you were arguing with Richard Dawkins about
there was another guy I had an argument with.
That's fantastic.
I think.
Who?
Ben Goldacre.
I'm a fan of him as well. Bad Science.
But he came out with some stuff about, no, it should definitely be. No, do you know who it was? It was the Richard Wiseman, the psychologist. And he started going on about how, no, so do you support independence, yes or no? He goes, yes is the first option, which means people will be biased towards it. Therefore, there should be a 67% threshold or something. I was like, you fucking nuts.
What?
Yeah. You know, people like, especially Dawkins, but Wiseman. I mean, these are people who don't really. Again, we're talking about this before as well. People just don't really understand Scotland or how things were going up here. And this guy going, well, you know, people, because yes is the first answer, there's going to be far too many folk just voting for it. I was like, believe me, mate. I mean, people have been talking about this. You know what I mean? It's not like folk are going to walk in there undecided.
That's a pretty condescending attitude.
But this is it. I mean, Dawkins is extremely condescending, you know.
And
I've heard this attitude from quite a lot of people. Well, it's my country too, you know. And these are people who don't understand that we have different laws up here, for example, or different education system, but it's their country too. It really grates me, you know. It really gets my goat. You know?
I think that's how we got onto the subject, wasn't it? We were saying, you know, people like Krauss and Dawkins can really grate on people. That can often put people, because of the way that they present the arguments, it can really put people off of things. So where Richard Dawkins is, in my opinion, great at explaining evolution. If you've seen him and engaged with him on Twitter, things like that, and you don't like his style when he's trying to explain that to you, it might colour your impression of his.
That's exactly what happened to me. Yeah, cause we have his books at home, and I do like his books, and I agree with you that that's a good medium for him.
Yeah.
And he's good at explaining things and all this, but I just really went off him because of this kind of social media presence he has.
Right. So I can't say I've experienced much of his social media. I can avoid that. But you're not the first person I've heard say that.
I think now it seems to be a team there for him. He doesn't seem to be
possibly, yeah.
Because the argument ahead with Ross. Got somebody in.
This is not working out, guys.
Have you seen the videos him reading hate mail?
Aye.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Amazing.
I mean, he does get himself saying he gets horrendous hate mail. You know, death threats and all that. And, I I mean, I appreciate what he does in terms of public understanding of science and all that, and I think he was one of the first kind of, not the first, but one of the first kind of celebrity scientists. I mean, he had Hawking, Stephen Hawking and things like that, but I think Stephen Hawking's maybe more of a famous for being clever rather than being a communicator of science. You know? Whereas Dawkins is, I mean, his first books were out in the 70s, weren't they?
Selfish Gene, 70s.
Well, what's your thoughts on guys that are sort of like in the kind of the mainstream headlights of science, like Neil deGrasse Tyson? You've got like Brian Cox and stuff. Yeah. What do you think about the kind of people that are in the front? Do you feel like they're sort of an easy way to lead people into science, and like so you're happy about it, or you kind of like, does they care enough?
Well, I wouldn't go to say that they don't care enough. You know, I would say it's quite clear that they do know something. A lot more about it than I do on a lot of the subjects that they're talking about. I think it is a good way. To be honest, it's probably biased in this because it's the way I got into this sort of stuff. And it was Dawkins that really fueled my passion about evolution. You know, from reading him. So I'm always going to have a soft spot for him. So things like that. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is quite good when he did like things like Cosmos. He's no Carl Sagan, nobody is, but I think Neil deGrasse Tyson did a pretty good job. And we're talking about communicators of science. I think Carl Sagan needs a mention, and undoubtedly he knew what he was talking about in a lot of things, and his books are just fantastic. Everybody at some point should read Demon Haunted World. I think it's an absolute. I've been looking for
that on ebook,
right?
And it's only available in paperback, I think.
Right.
So I've never get around to.
So there's no audio book.
I'm pretty confident that there will be somewhere, and I've definitely heard snippets of it in audiobook.
Well, you can read it. We'll record it.
Right, there we go.
We'll make it.
I love it.
Pale Blue Dot's another one that he did, which was just brilliant as well, and that's like humanity's future in space. Although he was writing maybe the 70s, I'm not entirely sure when that book came out. But he's got some fantastically interesting ideas and looks at a lot of sci-fi movies and things like that, and explores how you could actually do that sort of stuff, and it's really interesting. But Demon Haunted World, the subtitles, I think Science is a Candle in the Dark.
That's right.
It's a lot about skepticism, and as far as I'm aware, again I could be wrong, he sort of coined the term scientific skepticism. He was one of the first people to start really promoting this idea of just knowing a subject's not enough. You have to have this sort of emotional intelligence. You have to know what effect your emotions are having on these opinions that you've got, and you have to apply critical thinking to be able to have solid arguments and stuff. So I'm massive Carl Sagan fan.
What's your view of Bill Nye?
Bill
Nye seems to get a lot of shit for not actually being a scientist. He's an engineer, so he seems to get a lot of.
I mean, he's CEO of the Planetary Society. I don't. What? How do you define a scientist?
Well, that's a good question. No.
But I don't know. But I'm less of a fan of Bill Nye. I've not followed a whole lot of his stuff. He has a book on evolution called Undeniable, and I made it halfway through. I found the arguments weren't as. It was the same arguments you can find presented elsewhere, and the way that he presented them wasn't as engaging to me. Okay. I like that he's trying to promote science and get people interested into science, and I understand that science can be really off-putting when you first start because of all the lingo and the terminology and the detail that goes into it. But I think there's a point where if you start sacrificing that detail, you start sacrificing what's good about science. If you try and oversimplify everything, it starts being a little less valuable. So it's a hard question to answer, and I'm not against them promoting science to. Sound arrogant, but the layperson,
no, for sure. I mean, Brian Cox was doing these stadium tours just there, like a rockstar. He did the SCC in Glasgow. I mean, that's all the Smashing Pumpkins there. You know what I mean? It's like, but I think they do quite a good job. I mean, another thing is like, especially Neil deGrasse Tyson, they can have a bit of a reputation as being killjoys a little bit, And
that's what I like about them.
No, I don't mean about something like creationism or flat earthism or something, but like about movies, for example. I've had these conversations like this because I'm a huge movie fan,
right.
And I would get people talking about in the movie Gravity, right?
Yeah. Oh, I remember he put something up about this.
Oh, maybe, I could have. Where it was this great movie, right? And it was properly used 3D in terms of depth of. It was just a really great film. But then you have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson going, well, actually, see at that exact point, when she blew the airlock, it wouldn't have gone quite at that acceleration. Who cares? And so it worked as well sometimes. Or talking to pals that are scientists, I would have them kind of taking apart something like Gravity, a film that's gone out of its way to be kind of scientifically accurate. I'm like, why do you do it with a film that has gone out its way? But you don't do it with Predator,
I suppose
it is, to me, it's kind of a double standard where if you're going to complain about one movie not being scientifically accurate, you may as well do it with all of them, And I appreciate the fact that for the sake of a story, this is why like movies you always see them pull up right outside at wherever they're going, because you're not going to have somebody driving around in a movie for 20 minutes space, right? It serves a story for somebody to park right outside the bar or whatever. And for me it's the same with science in movies, if you need to move the scene along, you can have a door shoot out at 5 metres per second rather than 4.5. It's all right.
Somebody pulling up outside a bar in Train Spotting, and Neil deGrasse Tyson pops up being like, "I've been to Edinburgh." You couldn't park there. Let's be honest.
See, I reckon I'd maybe be one of the dickheads that you'd hate if I knew enough science to do it. I reckon I'd be like, fuck, that's wrong.
Because I'm kind of the opposite. I like when Neil deGrasse Tyson is about a killjoy. Because I feel like he's sitting there going, nope, just no.
Probably.
I'm just.
Sorry,
I haven't said that. You mentioned Trainspotting. I watched the second one last night, right? And I liked it. But I don't know, has anyone seen it? Or
I've not seen it yet. I've got it. No. I've got it on the. Got it.
So this isn't spoiling anything. But somebody like how to phrase this. So they get some EU funding basically, right? And it's kind of part of this scam. But I was watching it last night, and you can't scam EU funding like that. It's not like. Again, this is what people think about scientists getting funding, where it goes into your personal bank account. It doesn't. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't scam off the. Because what you do is you basically spend the money up front, then you claim it back in instalments from the EU. Right. This is how it works. And then of course it goes to an institutional bank account and all that. So there's just zero way that I could in any way scam an EU fund. But in the movie, somebody basically does it the same way that I could steal somebody's.
Right.
I was going. That's not how it works. I've become what I hated.
I'm just imagining the fact if you're looking for test tubes or something, you can't just throw in a bag of chewits or something like that for yourself.
No, exactly,
you can't just add that stuff in for these sort of
absolutely.
places.
I mean, even like.
So it's not like politicians' expenses when you can charge for a breakfast.
Well, I can.
Stop blending your leg
that's it. I mean, when I travel, like I submit expenses when I get back, but they're quite careful. I mean, in fact, in St Andrews they've just introduced new rules where we can't claim for alcohol at lunchtime anymore, which we could do in the past, and it's a maximum of half a bottle of wine per person per night now.
Right.
That's
half a bottle of wine's not that.
Who drinks wine? That's the biggest issue. Oh, the fucking middle class here.
I'm middle class now. No, beer gives me heartburn these days. I think it's an age thing.
What, and wine doesn't it? It's vinegar.
No, wine. No. I could drink wine like juice, basically. But beer. Like,
shit juice.
Very strong opinions about wine.
Aye.
And pineapple on a pizza.
You've been quiet most of the podcast, but when it comes to wine, fuck that.
If anybody drinks wine or they eat pineapple pizza, we're not going to get on.
I don't like pineapple pizza.
All right.
Good, Ross. You've calmed them down. That's
right. You're half human at least.
But beer. I think I first got into wine because I used to live. So I was at uni in Glasgow, and I was living in Paisley at the time, and I was having to get a bus. It was about a 45-minute drive, and quite often I'd be drinking pints, and I'd get to Govan. I'd have to jump off because I'd be bursting for a piss, like.
Totally.
Society's getting into the wine then because it was low volume.
I've got the bladder of a newborn baby. So when I'm drinking, like, I'm terrible.
Yeah.
You've got a 25-minute time limit, haven't you?
We actually timed it one night. 25 minutes is as far as I get with my terrible newborn bladder.
I mean, I'm really bad for it.
Shit.
And it's always been like that.
Aye.
But no, I mean, I really like wine, and
Are you a bit of connoisseur? Do you ken the different?
Not really. I mean,
you're essentially asking him if he's a dick.
The thing is, like, my wife's Italian as well, so we do. she knows a lot of wines, you know, because I was coming from a wine country and all that. But I tend to buy the £5 cheapies at a co-op,
Right,
you know, and then occasionally buy a nice one, you know.
There's all sorts of it.
Is there any real distinguishable difference? Aye.
Yeah, there's so many times that they've done tests like this, you know,
Aye.
putting cheap wine in expensive bottles, and even you know professional testers can't tell.
Aye.
Food colouring in white wine and telling them it's rosé, and they start describing it like
People hate
Rosé's a bastard wine anyway. I think it's I think it's pretty much that's what they do. It's effectively white wine that's been coloured by skins or something like that. But I tend to avoid rosé. But you know, white wine's good. I mean, as well. When we're in Italy, you can get obviously, let's say £5 cheapie is the best we can pretty much hope for, right? But in Italy, if you're £5, what maybe €6 at the minute. If you pay €6 for a bottle of wine in Italy, that's a good bottle of wine. Like,
Right.
Oh, really?
you can buy crap there for less than €1. It's the same in France, like stuff in cartons and all that.
I suppose it's dearer over here because you're exporting it to here and that as well. I suppose that
yeah.
there's sort of that factor comes into it.
Definitely. It's even more expensive in Iceland because I mean everything's expensive.
Oh, fuck, aye.
You know, but I remember looking into the Vinbuden as they call it, and bottles of wine. The cheapest was like £20 or something. It was just horrendously dear. But I mean, their own beer, like the Icelandic Tennant's called Gull, and that costs about £5 a pint. Something like that. They make it there, like, you know. But anyway, we went off track.
I'm going to continue going off track because there's something. Do you see this?
Aye.
There's apparently a fountain in Italy that dispenses free wine all day.
Yeah, it's in one of the villages in Tuscany, I think.
I don't even like wine, but that's amazing.
Would you spend the day there?
Well, I didn't like wine, so it'd be a waste.
I'm sure you'd get into
I'm
it.
sure you'd be happy because it's free. And then if you're there all day, you get used to it as you go along.
Also, didn't drink. So
do you not?
That's a fucking terrible.
Well, of course you don't like wine.
It's kind of makes sense.
He does drink.
I do drink, but I didn't really drink.
Right.
Because you didn't enjoy it.
Aye. So we're way off track, but so I used to drink like a normal person, right, in Scotland, and then I started to feel sick after having drinks. So now I just didn't drink because it's pointless. You get to a certain point and you're like, I feel sick. Fuck it, no point. But if it's hot, I'll maybe have some Cupar.
Right, okay.
Because it's juice essentially. And it doesn't do anything.
No,
so I do drink, but I didn't drink.
I mean, the thing is, like in Italy, like they're pretty unique in Europe. I think like this, where they don't really abuse alcohol at all. Like you very rarely see somebody steaming in Italy. Or if you do, it's me. You know. It's I mean, they drink like. Again, maybe it's a cost thing as well. But you know, if you go to a restaurant here and you buy a bottle of wine, it's probably going to cost you at least £15 in a restaurant, right? You're getting every drop out of that. But there, even in a restaurant, you can buy or a kind of a pavement cafe where you go for lunch. You can get a bottle of wine for a few quid. So quite often you'll see folk having a few glasses and just leaving the rest of the bottle. You know, which obviously a Scottish person that's what you do. But they tend. I mean, my father-in-law, for example, will sit and the wine is out on the table for the whole meal, right? But as soon as the food is off the table, the cork is back in the bottle. You know, there's no two ways about it. Even if there's that much left, I mean, here you go, just finish that off. But the attitude there is definitely there's no food.
That's you finished,
that's just the way they do it.
They start earlier as well.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, so my wife's from Taranto, which is right in the south, and she's a suburb of there called Lama, right? And it's on the beach, it's on the coast, and so you have a lot of the wee kind of beach bars and things like that, and wee kind of pizza places and all this kind of stuff. And you'll see like 16-year-olds going, and you have a group of 16-year-olds and they can drink there, right? You may have one who's drinking a beer and the rest are just sticking with cokes anyway. Right. And again, with us, because we make it this big taboo thing, and we're all desperate to do it. You know, whereas they're not, because you know, you well look in France as well, you'll get like kids drinking a wee glass of wine, maybe topped up with water or something. You know,
and it becomes much more normal. So it's not so exciting when you turn 18.
Exactly. I think that's the way we should do it here, because
I would agree.
You know, it's. I mean, I think Northern Europeans, like, obviously, I mean, most folk in Europe like a drink, you know. But I think it's the North ones that we have a kind of an issue with it more. Right. Maybe I'd say, because even Czech people drink quite a lot, but they can go out for one pint and then go home. Right. Which is I think a bit rarer for us. Yeah. Maybe it's changing now.
There's a lot of people that say they're going out for one pint and then go home.
The
but then they go out for a pint of vodka and coke and they get picked.
Yeah.
Apparently the French drink wine with their breakfast. Maybe
That's just a stereotype, man.
Yeah, I don't think so anymore.
The Carigada
Racist
Cologne.
statement I've just made.
I lived in France for a while in Bordeaux, and I saw people giving their wines wine with water in it, but I never saw anybody drinking it. I have seen people in Czech drinking beer with breakfast. They call it breakfast beer, and it's like 2%.
Right.
Yeah. And apparently in Kerry, County Kerry in Ireland, in some of the more rural places, you'll get guys going for a pint before they go to work. But I think that's in the real farming communities still, but I've never actually seen it. But
There you go.
I'm sure people in France used to do that. I mean, I'm sure people here, it's a coal community, isn't it? Kind of way, isn't it? Mining, coal mining.
I think it originally was. I think I read that somewhere.
So I bet back in the day they had lads going for a pint and
definitely.
going down the mines,
Still happens.
It's not nothing to do with wine, but apparently my great granddad used to have a porridge sandwich for the lunch.
Oh no!
I've heard about this.
It's not porridge sandwich. Oh no! Is this something else you've heard about?
Aye, but Lilo putting, or maybe not Lilo. My gran is called Lilo. It's not a real name. Doesn't matter. Basically, they would have like a drawer of porridge.
This is fucking disgusting.
And then they'd like cut a bit of porridge and just put it on their sandwich.
I've heard about this,
which is fucking
disgusting.
That's worse than drinking wine.
Imagine how dirty that porridge would be, man. Just dry, dirty, fucking sturdy porridge.
Why? Because there's no health and safety. You need to wash the drawer before you. This is back in the day, man.
Mental.
Porridge is one thing I can't. Because I was force-fed it as a wine, when I was going to school.
Done.
It was that and cod liver oil I get force-fed,
Oh, fuck.
And again, I'm of the age where I used to have to go to. I had to wear shorts at primary school all year.
Oh, Jesus. My dad got told to do that as well.
Oh, no, fuck that.
Aye. All year. So I was saying I started school in the early 80s, and we had to wear shorts until like 87, 88.
Jeez.
Aye, it was
what shit?
I remember as well, like, even in high school, so from the early 90s, like having to play hockey outside and the red blaze in fucking Renfrew, and like it'd be freezing cold, and you come back in, your hands would be like that, you couldn't do your shirt back up and all this, And the shorts were hot pants like they made as well.
It builds character, Ross. That's what that does.
I'm glad I'm a child. I've missed all this. I missed the glory days.
There you go.
We didn't even get hit when we were young.
We could say we've evolved to be better people. There you go. If I say the better, it would be amazing. But there you go. So we're going to talk a wee bit about evolution. So with my terrible segue as well, fucking fluffing everything up as well. You want to explain? You got things that you want to actually put forward as part of evolution?
I'm not sure. It depends what sort of angle we want to come from. Evolution's this massive subject, and it covers so much stuff, and it can get really complicated. But I like looking at the sort of arguments we've been speaking about so far, with like the creationist and the contrarian side of this, and a lot of the common misconceptions about evolution and how it works and things like that are pretty interesting as well. So I don't know the best way to go into this, but I mean, what do you guys think?
How do we start this off?
Well, I thought we had already talking about the creationism, so what are some of the biggest misconceptions about evolution in your
well, like we were talking about before the show, what it is that actually evolves. You don't. It's not an individual organism that evolves. It doesn't. It's not born and it changes, and when it's given birth. You don't inherit these characteristics into your kid. It's the gene pool that changes over a long period of time. So it's that you get what's called alleles. The different competitors for a specific genetic spot, if you will, and it's the frequency of these alleles changing. So the frequency of certain alleles in a population and the change of them is basically what evolution is. So a lot of people think of one organism changing over time, but it's not that. It's this gene pool that happens usually over a massive period of time. And some of the sort of famous arguments that we encounter a lot are things like irreducible complexity. Have you come across this one? So
I've no heard of the name, but I've maybe heard of the argument.
So how can we possibly have an eye? Because all the bits of an eye have to be present before we can do it. How about a wing is a common one as well. So there's lots of ways to look at that, but I think these arguments are quite weak as well. So
totally, yeah. I mean, people. Yeah, I know this one about the eye because. But I mean, the thing is, you do get creatures who have very, very basic kind of light sensing spots, don't they? And which would be useful if you just want to know if it's day or night.
Yeah.
If you're a very basic organism, or
and it goes through these stages. As you say, you get this sort of flat light sensitive thing. You can tell it's day or night, or if you're on the bottom of the water, someone comes and shades you. There's a chance that might be a predator. Get out of there. Light sensing light patch is all you need. Then eventually you get it sort of forming a cup, and you start being able to get directions. So if you imagine a flat thing like this, you can tell if it's getting light. If you get a thing like this, and this bit's getting light and this bit's not, you can tell light's coming from this direction. Right. And then the more and more you cup, the more accurate you can get about which direction the light is coming from or not coming from.
There's a good video with Richard Dawkins explaining this.
Yeah,
I'm sure he was on like a TV show. And he just got asked, and he was just like, "Oh, I'll totally explain that."
With the creationist guy, yeah.
I can't remember if there was an actual creationist there, but I remember it just being brought up randomly, and I was like, "I could totally explain that."
Yeah, and Richard Dawkins is the explanation I've read, and that he's the one that talks about these different stages and these different gradients, and how it's not big jumps that they take. You don't need to take big jumps. It's just a slow accumulation of change over time.
It's because creationists are saying, "Oh well, I'll believe it when I see a monkey give birth to a human or something like that."
Yeah.
They expect this kind of thing to happen very
really painful.
If you ever saw that, it would pretty much disprove evolution overnight. If that sort of thing happened, everyone who knows how evolution works would be like, "Well, that doesn't fit in our theory. What's happened here?" It'd be completely off track. So they're asking for this unreasonable level of evidence based on a complete misunderstanding of what's going on.
That happens a lot.
Yeah.
We had a conversation about you disliking the thing used at primary schools, where it's the small thing and it gradually goes up to human, and then you said it was starting them off in the wrong direction.
Yeah, so when you've got this picture of a chimpanzee and it slowly progresses through old animals.
That's this famous kind of image of
it really annoys me because it sort of reinforces this idea that chimpanzees are an organism that we used to be and we've evolved from them, whereas they're a modern animal as well. We're cousins to them, and so we share a common ancestors, and they're on a different branch of the tree, so they're as evolved as us, if you will. We're not a more evolved version of a chimpanzee, we're just a different part of that tree. So when you see this standard progression, I think the argument was there's millions of these pointing at the chimpanzee and there's millions of these, where's everything in between? Well, that argument doesn't make sense when you start talking about them being on the same level and the same part of the tree. There's not
is there something that could be similarly used for primary school kids?
Well, I mean, the idea of an evolutionary tree is the way to do it, to show them, that there's the very ends of the branches are us and other modern organisms, and that they all sort of converge together, and that's a much better way of looking at it. This branching pattern rather than this straight linear progression. It's not a straight linear.
I think if the way that the creationists' argument is that everything sort of started from one animal, and then everything on Earth would just be us. So I think it's a terrible fucking argument.
So I mean, the last sort of universal common ancestor they talk about. I mean, all of us do have a common ancestor. Again, back to Richard Dawkins, he wrote an amazing book that was called The Ancestor's Tale, and he walks you backward through evolutionary time with different rendezvous, he calls them. So it's like, first of all you start with humans and you're the first character, and he will walk you back to the common ancestor between us and chimpanzees, say, and then between us and gorillas, then us and other mammals, then us and other vertebrates, and then and he just goes right back. But eventually we all do come to one organism. There is, or nobody knows how life originated, but it's likely that we all come from one thing that's the first life, and the sort of evidence for that is this common genetic language between all of us, and right down to bacteria at the bottom, and they still use the same sort of DNA, RNA type language, proteins sort of.
You got much an idea of abiogenesis, or you sort of?
As far as I'm aware, it's sort of like what happened before the Big Bang. We just don't know. There's lots of great sort of arguments as to how it happened. There's this one, the RNA world. So RNA was the precursor to DNA. So a good way to look at it in modern organisms, if you've got DNA that's really good at replicating itself and dealing with mutations, you've got proteins that are really good at folding into different shapes, which means they can do different roles, whereas DNA would be rubbish at folding into different shapes. It's only got this one shape, and proteins would be rubbish at replicating themselves and storing information over a long time, whereas RNA is sort of in the middle. So RNA is single-stranded, it can fold a bit, it can play roles of things like enzymes, but it can also have a wee bit of this replication and pass information on. So a lot of people would say that RNA world, and RNA was this first molecule that came around, and eventually was sort of usurped by DNA and proteins over evolution. pre-evolutionary time, but nobody knows if that's the case. There's another one, a guy called Graham Cairns-Smith, who talks about the deep hot rocks theory, where he reckons that life might have formed from inorganic crystals. So he's talking about how if you're at the edge of a river or edge of a system of water, there could be shapes of molecules that could catch other molecules and could end up building up chains, and this might have been the first origin of replicators. So replication is what we need for evolution to happen. So his argument is that this could have happened from inorganic molecules. There's this famous Stanley Miller experiments where they put a whole bunch of sort of ingredients that we might have had in an early Earth, and he runs electricity through it to simulate lightning strikes, and he ends up getting basic amino acids and stuff coming out of it. So he showed that there was this self-generation. When you look at cells are surrounded by what they call a lipid bilayer. So it's lipids are sort of like fats, and the way that they are shaped, they have a hydrophilic end and a hydrophobic end. So one end that's tries to get away from water, one end that tries to get close to water. So because of this, if you've got a whole bunch of them get together and they make a circle and it's all in water, you're naturally going to have the edge that wants to be next to the water on the outside and the edge that wants to be away from the water on the inside. So it's this self, that you don't need any sort of magical ingredient for that. It's this self-forming of lipid bilayers that are key to cells. So nobody knows about abiogenesis, nobody knows how it was created, but it doesn't seem to be there doesn't seem to be any great trick involved in generating what they call protobionts, which are like early precursors to biological life. So there's ideas, there's theories out there, but I would say, like the Big Bang, you have to be comfortable saying we don't know, and if anyone does say they do know, I would probably disagree.
God.
Yes, God.
God's up to
But
there's also the conversation that I always struggle to get my head around. It's the idea of the first human, or the idea that there wasn't a first human. It was always just a case of something that's a bit more human-y than someone else.
Again,
but it's you couldn't really tell whether it was that species or that species. It's just a bit more human-y than it looks.
Yeah, so Richard Dawkins has a lot of great analogies with this. If you imagine somebody getting older, there's no point where somebody goes from being young to being old. They don't go to bed one night young, wake up the next morning being old, but there's a slow gradient. And if you looked at images over their whole life, you could see them at the start being really young, at the end being really old. But if you took a photo, say every 5 minutes of them, there would be very little difference between each photo in the list. So evolution's like that. It's really hard to perceive it, but it doesn't mean that the change isn't happening. And if you look at it over long timescales, you can see this. So I've gone off your question a wee bit there. I've forgotten what you said.
I can't remember what I said.
So there never was one first human. There's never been an organism that's given birth to a different species. So a species is defined, or often defined, as a group of organisms that interbreed together and produce fertile offspring. So every child of a pair has been of the same species as its parents, which can be very confusing because obviously species have changed. But it's this really, really slow process. So I'm maybe explaining that badly again, but if you
I know what you're saying. I can't comprehend.
So if you got in a time machine and went back 10,000 years, you could breed with the humans that you would find. If you went back 10,000 years before that, you probably still could. If you went back 100,000 years, you couldn't reproduce with anything that's going on.
Apparently there was I don't know if it was actually breeding or attempted breeding between humans and
Neanderthals.
Neanderthals.
I heard about that.
But I don't know if is that because they're so closely linked that they were able to.
So technically, they say that technically Neanderthal is same species as us, subspecies. Right. Yeah, Homo sapiens is us. Homo sapiens sapiens is us, and Homo sapiens neanderthalensis or something is Neanderthal. So they are the same species and they can breed together. And there's a lot of our DNA that is from Neanderthals.
So what is the difference? Is there much of a difference?
I don't know is the honest answer. Subspecies is very, very complicated, so it's sort of a good way to look at it as races, sort of.
Right.
Different. Yeah, that is maybe not a great analogy. I don't know is the honest answer there. Yeah.
Some of the things like Neanderthals, like maybe he had a bigger head or something like that. That's as far as I know, but.
And again, you've got to remember that when you're talking about populations, it's averages. So on average, a Neanderthal might be slightly bigger in some dimensions, slightly smaller brain capacity and things like that.
Kind of the same idea with humans, that you get people with fucking different sizes and stuff like that. They're not looking exactly the same like monkeys do, sort of thing.
No.
So there was
I don't think monkeys really look the same either. I
Well,
think it's
to us they look
because
all
we're
the same.
racist.
I think so. I think that could well be. Aye.
So was there ever a first human? I don't think it really quite works.
Well, what about like
No.
the first? Because presumably life started in water, and so there's the first fish type thing that was able to live on land.
So,
Or
yeah,
is it two different like bacteria? One that started to evolve into sort of like wet soil and stuff like that, and then one that happened to stay in water, and then they two went in separate ways.
Yeah, I mean,
Is it coming across that I don't know much about evolution?
Are you talking about like a fish that's just sort of like we could have evolved from a fish that just sort of fell out?
Well, no.
Fell out the pond or
That's
something like that?
the silly assumption is that
Aye.
a fish walked out the water, which obviously couldn't have happened.
No.
I'm asking about the realistic.
Or
thing
like I
of-
could see on land or
Yeah.
something like it was at the top of the water and went, oh, like that.
Yeah.
And then I just didn't think
No,
about it.
you've gone too far to fish.
I'm just not.
So I mean, the famous one that they reckon is the first tetrapod, this animal that came and walked on land, is something called Tiktaalik rosier, which is
Looks like a spider the way you're doing that actually. To be
well,
fair.
it's got feet. So this is just feet. It doesn't have 5 of them, right? But it's a great story in its own right because it's a really solid proof of evolution. It's one of my favourite sort of predictions that they've made.
Mhm.
But have you ever heard of the Cambrian explosion?
No.
So this is like sort of 540 odd million years ago, and this is when most sort of complex life started showing up in the fossil records. So there's a lot of discussion about why, we seem to have nothing before that, and then all of a sudden we get everything, and there's a lot of talk about what that means. Most of the explanations are, is that's when they started forming hard body parts, and that's why they started fossilizing. So just before that, they weren't suitable for fossilizing. But
That
it's,
makes sense.
the Devonian period is this, age of the fish, and that's when they reckon that we came out of the water, or I say we. This is when Tiktaalik came out of the water. But there's a famous guy, Neil Shubin, I think it's the University of California, and he wanted to find out when this period was. So he tried to work out from geological record when we're likely to have animals coming out onto Earth. So he looked something like is it 300? I'm not 100% sure in the numbers here, but he looked at say 370 million years ago there was fish and there was no mammals. 360 million years ago there was fish and reptiles that came out onto the land. So he thought somewhere in between there must be a period where they transitioned. So he looked all over the world for exposed rock strata that were roughly 365 million years old. He found them in a place in the north of Canada called Ellesmere Island. He went up there and dug, and then sure enough he finds this animal that looks exactly like you'd expect this transition to be. Called it Tiktaalik rosier, and it's one of these sort of like a prediction. So he's like, if evolution's true, we should be able to find an animal that looks like this in this place. And then he went and he found it. You try and explain that
Excellent,
one if evolution's not true. Yeah.
Right, that's going in my back pocket for the next
it's a
time I
good
get an
one,
argument.
There's another one called Darwin's hawk moth, which is it's the second part of its binomial name is Predicta, and it's all about the same idea. So they found orchids, I think it's in Madagascar again, 100% sure on that were really deep, and they knew that they were pollinated by different species, and they could watch moths pollinating loads of other plants, but they didn't know what was pollinating this. And he was like, the depth of this is certain size, so it needs to have a moth that's got a proboscis long enough to get to this. So I predict that this moth will be discovered at some point, and eventually loads are looking and they find, oh look, there's a moth that fits exactly the characteristics that he predicted would exist, and they're called Darwin's hawk moth. There's loads of these predictions, and it's a common thing that people say is that evolution's not a science because you can't make observations and you can't make predictions. Well, you can, they're just not in the same way.
That's it. Because there's potentially there's tons and tons of species that are not that you can't find even now.
Yeah.
So there's potentially fucking thousands and thousands of chances of that happening now as well.
No.
Still.
Yeah, I mean they say if in a handful of dirt you've got thousands of species of bacteria and things like that. If you want to name something after yourself, study bacteria.
We were talking about before you came in. We were talking about spiders. I thought we'd bring up the thing, and you told me. Well, the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life, a spider with a lasso.
Yeah, it's a bolas spider. So again, I'm trying to remember which Dawkins book it was.
A bola spider.
Bolas. So a bolas is like...
I thought you said Ebola, the first one. That's what scared me.
Bolas.
A bolas is like
Don't he
two
fucking
weights
put it
on the end of a rope and you throw it and you can
Well,
catch
look
it.
away and I'll-
Sliders
I'll-
or something very similar to this.
Does it really?
Yeah, so it makes it like a web and it throws it and it like holds the insect in place and then can run up and get it. It's pretty incredible.
Literally
But,
Spider-Man as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus.
So in this book by Richard Dawkins, he was
Right,
talking
turn it that way.
Oh yeah.
I'm assuming that's the wee lasso thing.
You want to show the fucking people watching?
What? Well, they're not going to be able to see it.
But
You
would
don't
love
want
to-
to see it.
I was going to say, I would love to put one up, but I'm not fucking searching for that picture. Ever.
I'm going to need to watch a video of this.
Aye.
I'll do it later.
Yeah,
Aye,
so
please
he was
do.
talking about all sorts of things. So this was he got one of his colleagues to compile a list of things that have only evolved once, as far as they're aware. So he's talking about the probability. He's talking about things called Kaufman reruns. So if we reset the clock and we went back and started evolution again, how likely it is would we end up with the same sort of species? How much randomness is involved in what's happened? And is it likely that humans would evolve again, or has there just been some accident that's happened that's led to us? So he talked. The witnesses that he calls quite a lot are constraint and what animals have to deal with, the problems that animals have to solve. So it's very likely that we would get eyes again. Eyes have independently evolved in loads of different species over time. Animals need to be able to navigate around their environment, so something to see, sense light is not a bad way to do it. Whereas this guy compiled a list of things that have only ever evolved once, and the bolas spider was one. The horsefly larva I was telling you about that creates its own wee den. It's absolutely amazing. So you get an adult horsefly comes and lays its eggs in a puddle in Africa. The little larvae hatch in this puddle and then they go down to the bottom of the water and bury themselves into the ground, because the dry seasons come in, it's going to dry out that puddle. If they weren't under the ground they would die. But the problem is that when the ground dries out, it cracks. So you imagine if this little insect's in a wee hut here and the crack comes over, opens up where it's hiding, it's fair game for birds. So this thing digs down in a creative way, so it digs sort of a perimeter around where it's going to weaken the ground, and then digs down into the middle of it, so when you get these cracks coming across, instead of going straight across and showing the larva, it hits the edge and then follows the edge around. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Archer fish that spit stuff down off a roost. There's probably a few others. Ant lions, so they're like an insect that makes like a funnel in sand, and like ants come along, and when they get into the edge it starts throwing dirt up at them, so it knocks the ant down and eventually eats them. And then he was talking about things that have never evolved and trying to work out why things haven't evolved. So he talks about wheels. Why has nothing ever evolved a wheel? It seems to be a pretty effective way of moving. There's lots of issues with it, like they're not very good if you don't have roads. So if you a car versus a horse, the car's going to win, but try doing that across fields and rocky ground. The horse has definitely got the advantage. And obviously if you need blood vessels going into something to power it, if it's spinning, that's really hard to do. But the one exception that he said sort of counts is on you get something on a bacteria called
a flagellum.
Bacteria flagellum.
Oh, show off. I'm not just a physicist.
Exactly that. And then have you ever read Philip Pullman's stuff, his Dark Materials?
Oh, I've read it all.
Well, he does an amazing sort of, it's a fantasy world that he created, and he creates this species that do evolve wheels, and it's like a symbiotic relationship between this weird creature and a tree. So the tree produces really round seeds that drop off, and this creature has things that can go into the side of the seed. And there's as a freak of geology in his world that he's created, there's lots of flat paths. So he not only does he invent this creature with a wheel, it actually makes evolutionary sense how he's done it. Really interesting. Fire and metal. Why is there nothing that really uses fire in the same sense as say an electric heater uses electricity? Why does nothing generate fire like that? Why does nothing use metal to create its skeletons? Why is there nothing that can produce radio signals to communicate?
Oh, that's a good, good point.
He reckons that the metal is connected to the fire, so you can't really make stuff out of metal until you can heat it up and change it. So if you could harness fire to make heat to melt metal and use it to create your skeletons, maybe that would work. But it's not very good as it is because nothing can use it.
So a dragon is literally a ridiculous animal, you're saying?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yeah, there is a famous fossil that's called Draconix hogwartsia, which is Latin for the Dragon King of Hogwarts, and it looks very much like a dragon, but it's a dinosaur. Yeah. Didn't breathe fire, as far as I'm aware.
I can't imagine fire being an efficient use of an animal's energy either.
No.
Probably sort of uncontrolled release, isn't it? Use it all up. So it's probably
it'd be cool though.
It would be cool.
Maybe with genetic modifications we could get some actual
GMOs
dragons.
ethics behind modifying things.
You want to talk a wee bit about GMOs?
We can try, if there's any questions. I'm not very clued up on it, but
you're a wee bit more clued up on most things anyway.
But that's
we straw
that's
poll and
not
who's pro GMO and anti GMO. Yeah, I think GMOs have got a lot of potential, but there's a lot of issues that we need to concern ourselves with, and one of the main ones is creating super insects and super pests. If you don't get if you create pesticide resistant crops, and the only ones that survive are the ones that are resistant to this, you end up with a whole race of insects that are totally resistant to the pesticides we've got, and then what does that mean?
Yeah.
So there's things like that we have to consider, but on the topic of climate change, I think one of the biggest risks is food security and food availability and conflict over resources, and I think GMOs are one of the best tools we have at our disposal to be able to combat that and create more food for being able to feed a population, even if it comes to having smaller areas to do that in. So I don't think we should discount them. I'm very upset with the idea of blanket bans on research on GMOs and things like that, but on the other hand there is issues that we have to
like these ridiculously muscled cows.
Yeah.
Was there a reason for them being made?
Oh, I've seen. Was
it not to create more meat? Obviously, that kind of makes more sense, but just ridiculously fucking.
Was that real? I didn't think
buff cows, man.
Yeah.
I think in America they're a bit more laissez-faire with the antibiotics and that kind of thing.
Steroids.
Yeah, I was walking down the coast route between Anstruther and Crail a while ago, and there's an enormously muscled cow, a bull there, and also something like a cartoon. It's
a monster.
Yeah, I mean, really well defined muscles as well. And I thought, well, I've never seen a bull like this. It's.
It might not be. It depends what we mean by genetic modification. I don't know if those animals would be transgenic. Genes put in from somewhere else, or if they've just been selectively bred for.
That's the thing. I mean, a lot of things like sweet corn is genetically modified, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think quite a lot of stuff we eat is people think a GMO is something that's been created in a lab,
you see the thing
and stuff.
An orange with a syringe in it.
Tomatoes with fish genes. Have you heard that one?
I have heard that.
There's a fish in the Arctic that's got antifreeze in its blood, so they took the gene out of that and put it in tomatoes, so that you could freeze your tomatoes and they didn't turn to mush. And a lot of people think, fish in my tomato? What are you on about? Is that going to taste fishy? And no.
There was a response saying, well, you've also got fish genes and you taste fishy.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say I'm pretty much pro GMO. I just think we have to be cautious about what we're doing.
So it's a question of control, then, isn't it? Kind of a duty of care in terms of pesticides and things.
I sometimes feel like I'm the only person that's moaning at the SNP for banning GMOs in Scotland.
Yeah, I'm very happy about that.
It appears there's at least a couple of us, so that's good.
And that's one of the I often consider myself quite closely allied with the Greens, but there's a few topics that they have that are just so polar opposite to what I think.
Nuclear energy,
GMOs, and they want to close down zoos, which having worked in a zoo is not it's a bit of an awkward one to vote for. So unfortunately, I actually think the Lib Dems have a very good approach to that. This science-based approach to it. I think their environmental policies are pretty solid as well. But then on the other hand, they're anti-independence and lying bastards. So it's an awkward one. Yeah.
Just to get back to modifications, there's been some people working on some sort of animals that are able to sort of grow back parts of their body and stuff like that. Some people are thinking about kind of working with them to try.
Absolutely amazing things. They're made of bone. Some of these deer, like elk, are producing an inch of bone a day. You can watch these things grow. They grow a whole new set of them every single year.
Do they drop off?
Cast them every year. So the only mammal I know of that can regenerate a limb, and not only can they do it, but they do it every single year. One of the big stopping points is they don't make anything complex. So, if you've seen an antler, it's a big bit of bone with some sort of branching shapes. Developing something like an elbow or a knee joint is a different beast entirely. Just a straight bit of bone. But they have this incredible stem cells, a bit on the top of their heads called the pedicle, and this is what generates this growth, and it's surrounded in velvet and gives it a blood supply. And there's a lot of work on how the stem cells work there. Could we use this to regrow bones and things like that? And if someone lost their arm, could we regrow them the bone and then graft skin around it and things like that? It's a long way off being in hospital anytime soon, but I would say on my very limited knowledge with it, it's definitely plausible, and I think that's a good angle to come at it from, is this regeneration of mammal bone and endear.
Again, these are situations where it makes me despair with the fact that people just didn't like science.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
There's no reason that, like, without science, you were never going to we've fucking grown burgers. Growing burgers. That is fantastic. Vegans can finally eat burgers.
Yeah, I think that it's the same. I don't know if you read the Sunday Herald. There's a guy in it every week, and he's dying of some degenerative disease, MS or something like that, or motor neuron disease possibly. He lives up in Inverness, and he's in a flat like in the first floor. He's basically housebound, and he's booked himself into Dignitas in Switzerland, you know, for assisted suicide, which obviously still illegal here, which I think is something that's quite regressive.
That pisses me off every single
totally. I mean,
election.
And so this guy, so it's every week he's talking about the kind of the indignities that he's suffered, you know, over the previous week. Yeah. And if this was something that was available, you know, he wouldn't have to suffer these things, you know. But this again, it's a religious thing, isn't it? It's not religious. So I don't think there's any secular reason for anyone to deny kind of assisted suicide for somebody,
especially someone who's like, you know, compass mentis, and you know is able to clearly explain that I've had enough of this. I have no issue with that. It does become a wee bit more complex when you've got, you know, people who maybe can't say themselves, and if their family think it, that can be.
There's the issue with mental health.
Yeah. Like,
do you allow somebody to go through assisted suicide just because they're suicidal? That seems like a moral issue. Yeah. So but I don't know which way I'd go on that. I don't know. I'd probably offend a lot of people if I went either way. So
yeah, maybe sticking with something like motor neuron disease, we have quite a short life expectancy after being diagnosed with it. It's a very painful, horrible, you know, undignified kind of way to go. And yeah, as you say, the guy's compass mentis. So I mean, I think in that position, I think people should be able to say, right, well, enough's enough, you know. Especially if they can't even get a ground floor flat. Yeah. You know, so it's kind of cursing this guy, you know, it's imprisoning him in this house.
Because it offends my morals if you have to suffer with that, because, you know, I don't like the idea of you being able to get out of it. Excuse me.
Fucking.
So I'm definitely in support of assisted suicide, but I just think there has to be a lot of consideration into it as well. It's not nothing's ever cut and dry.
No, definitely.
I mean, I suppose that's the job then for the medical ethicists and all that.
Exactly.
The kind of fundamental right to die.
Also, this thing about donating your organs. I think Wales, they've got an opt-out system.
Yeah, so you're in.
I think we've still got an opt-in system. I think it should be an opt-out system. I think once you're dead, I mean, if you're not using the organs, somebody else could be using them. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. And if you've really got this moral objection to that for some stupid, fucked up reason, then cool, you could opt out. But
I mean, what if you genuinely believe that you're going to have a next life and you need your bits?
Then psychological evaluation. That's the only thing that's left.
But I suppose you answered that with the opt-out, though, didn't you? If you've got massively strong religious beliefs and you think you need your stuff, I don't know if anyone can really say, well, tough, we're taking your organs. If you opt out, then
it's not an abuse of human rights either, because you're dead at that point. There's nothing there. I mean, the argument could maybe be what family members are still alive, and that could be an abuse on them, but there's no a substantial argument there, in my view.
I would definitely be inclined to agree again.
No, but that's interesting, because I suppose that if you, I mean, they're always looking for, is it bone marrow that's really difficult to match if somebody has leukemia? So it's quite often you'll see it, like in Scotland, for example. I've seen appeals for folk because there might be somebody who's from a South American indigenous background, which obviously is very, very rare in Scotland, for example. And there's an appeal, is there anybody else from this area who might have a match? So I mean, I suppose if you've got like a special blood type, maybe it's kind of
really rare. But you're the only option for this guy, and you're like, well, I don't need it, but I have religious reasons for not wanting you to have it. That's a very hard thing.
It's a shit person,
isn't it?
That's
definitely. Right.
So yeah, what next? We were talking about evolution.
We totally branched off.
Yeah.
Into another conversation.
But that is another relevant thing to climate change. You know, adaptation usually takes a long time for species to adapt to changes. So the big problem with climate change just now is the rapid nature of the change, and are things going to be able to adapt to keep up with that? So one of the big things I worry about with climate change is a loss of biodiversity. And depending on who you ask, some folk are saying a quarter of all species that we know, and things like that. So it's very hard to be exact. But I think it's the rapid nature of this change that is, stopping evolution being able to solve it.
When I was at school, we were told that towns were going to be underwater,
right.
but we were told in a couple of 100 years. But now I'm being told 30 years there's going to be towns underwater. How fucking...
So it's really hard. So a lot of what people call... what people think people are predicting, when they're saying things like this, are a lot of the time from the IPCC, and they do these SRES scenarios. So it's what would happen under specific given scenarios. So if we started reducing our CO2, we might see this effect. If we just started pumping out every bit of CO2 we've got, we might see this effect. So you might have one projection with a model that says, if we do X, Y, and Z, we're going to see sea level rise of this much, and places are going to be underwater. So somebody sees that and thinks scientists are predicting that we're going to be underwater by this much, and that's not what the model's saying. The model's saying under a specific scenario that we give, we might see this. Under different scenarios, we'll see something else. Under different scenarios, we'll see this. And because it's so affected by human behaviour, getting accurate predictions of what's going to go on in the future is very, very hard. It's a chaotic system, but you can get best guesses. We think if we keep producing this much, it's going to rise by X, Y, or Z. We can look historically or geologically rather than historically and see when temperatures were this high, we got sea levels that were this high, and you can build up a decent picture. But I would be very cautious about anyone who says, in this year it will be this. I think that's too accurate.
So how about, this seems vague enough, within our lifetime, do you think we'll see towns that we know today underwater, or a small village off the coast is some place that's near an ocean?
Well, we're already seeing sea level rise. I would say it's not impossible, but I don't think we're going to see New York City underwater.
That was one of the cities that was meant to be under in 60 years.
Yeah. There's lots of different things.
There was Bill Nye done a... You seen his wee series they done on Netflix?
I've not
Bill
seen
Nye
it
thing.
yet. I've heard bad
They were. Aye.
As a shit.
It's alright. It's alright. It's a bit kind of they hate celebrities coming and stuff like that, which I hate. I hate when they do that. But they were talking about there was a place in, I can't remember what country. I didn't watch enough of this, but there was a country that had already set into place loads of systems so that the water levels wouldn't rise in that place.
Right.
So there were huge machines in the water, big fucking massive machines.
Yeah.
Just so that they could sort of stop that happening, sort of thing, because it was already started flooding a lot of the places.
Yeah. And there's lots of confusion about it, because it's not really simple. You get something that's called isostatic rebound, so you've got the land's actually going up. So it's not just sea level. If sea level rises by a metre, then we'll have a metre further up the coast because the land's changing as well. There's also considerations with stuff called storm surges, which are a problem. So when you've got a big storm on the coast, it brings water further in. So if your water's slightly higher, but it's not drowning the city, but then you get a massive storm, and because it's slightly higher, there's a whole lot more damage.
Right.
That's still an issue with sea level rise. But yeah, so sea level rise is a thing to be concerned about, but I don't think we're all going to be. It's not going to be water world any time.
No.
A famous argument that you hear about that is with icebergs melting. This is one that I used to say before I was, in on climate change. If you get an iceberg floating around on water and it melts, it doesn't actually change the sea level because, the volume in the ice displaces.
It's already the same.
Yeah.
I learnt this a wee while ago, and I thought I'd been learnt wrong. I'd been told for ages that sea levels are going to rise because of the icebergs, and then this new information I was kind of conflicted.
So land-based ice, that will make a difference. If you got things like Antarctica, so the Arctic is a frozen ocean surrounded by land. The Antarctic is a continent with serious amounts of ice built up on top of it. If the ice in Antarctica melts and it runs into the water, that will affect sea level rise. If the ice in the Arctic melts, because it's already floating on water, it won't make the same difference. So Greenland as well is a land-based glacier. So melting ice can affect sea level rise. It's also true that stuff that's already in the water, if it melts, it's not going to...
So there is one that's melting at a much faster rate than the other. And NASA,
the
because there was an article released by NASA, and then a lot of climate change skeptics shared this, saying that but there's not been any melting in this area. And
so I can't remember who wrote the paper, but I know the one that you're talking about, and it found that the rate in Antarctica was a lot slower than people were expecting. The paper is very explicit about how that if we continue with what we're going to do, it is going to start melting and it is going to be a problem. But obviously, the people are inclined to do so. Just read the first chapter, say or like, see, he says it's not melting, we're fine. But so no, some ice melting will affect sea level rise. One of the big things, they reckon about a third of sea level rise currently is a result of thermal expansion. If you heat water, it expands, it takes up more room. So
shit!
Yeah, so that's without the melting of the ice. That's just heating the oceans. It's gonna take up more room. So that's something that's worth thinking about as well. There's lots of different angles, as with all climate or all science, as far as I'm aware. There's usually a picture that has to be built up with evidence from loads of different angles. Yeah. It's not just ice melts, therefore sea level rise. Ice doesn't melt, therefore no sea level rise. You know what I mean? So I would be slightly concerned about the sea level rise, but it's not my biggest issue.
So what is your biggest issue?
Loss of biodiversity. So there's a lot of things that cause problems for biodiversity just now. So for example, habitat destruction. If we create fragmented habitats, you can't support so much biodiversity in it. This is bad. If you heat the planet up, one of the most common responses of species is to move. So you either move polewards or you move higher up mountains. Because we've fragmented the habitat so much, moving is a problem. So if you imagine a species that needs to move northwards, but it's moving northwards and Glasgow's in the way, that species is now fucked, because it can't go anywhere, its habitat's changing, and because we've fragmented the habitat so much, it's got nowhere to go. Invasive non-native, so we spread species around the world. You get some species that are really top at competing, so grey squirrels is a great example in our country. It's not really related to climate change, but we bring in grey squirrels, they outcompete our red squirrels. You see a massive decline in red squirrels. Or in a world where the situation's changing rapidly and we're getting warming extremely quickly, species that happen to be good at invading because they're good at adapting, they're good at combating lots of different situations that they find themselves in, will also be the ones that benefit the most from climate change. So when climate change happens, species that aren't so good at adapting will become less effective, and these invasive species that are good invaders because they're good at adapting will become more or will become better at adapting. Well, that's not right, but they'll be in a better situation, if you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So
what kind of animals are you thinking about then, in that sense? The sort of better invaders. What sort of animals would be?
So a lot of it's plants. Things like Himalayan balsam in our country or Japanese knotweed. These are really good at adapting to a wide variety of different situations, which is why they're spreading so fast. So if you imagine then a situation where we put rapid change on the ecosystem through warming, the species that aren't so good at adapting, that are the ones that are already suffering, will suffer more. The species that are good at adapting, say Himalayan balsam for example, will become even more competitive because it can adapt better. So invasive non-native species is a problem that we face with biodiversity right now, but you're likely to see that exacerbated by rapid change to ecosystems. So that's just, there's lots of species that will suffer like that. And then there's birds. There's a famous one just now with birds is about the timing of events. So spring events happen about 2.1 days per decade earlier now than they used to. So if you've got animals, say, that have synchronised their breeding seasons to a time of year where there's lots of insects for them to eat, if the spring events change and you get mistimed events, you get lots of insects and no birds to eat them, and then lots of these insects start dying off, and then the birds are born and the young birds have nothing to eat and no food. This has these massive knock-on effects as well. So my personal concern is this loss of biodiversity through largely through exacerbating problems that already exist. And then there's doomsday scenarios. If you've heard about the methane bomb, so methane is another very important greenhouse gas. It's actually way more potent individually than carbon dioxide is, and you've got lots of it buried in ice or stored in ice. If you start melting the ice, it can release massive amounts of methane into the atmosphere. So there might be a point where you sort of go over an edge. You've caused so much warming that the ice is starting to melt. You can't stop that, and because the ice is melting, it's now producing greenhouse gases, which are reinforcing the warming. So that's when you get doomsday scenarios. An extra 6 degrees on global average temperature. That's seriously going to fuck everything up. And then ocean acidification, you know this one as well. So you get a chemical reaction between carbon dioxide in the air and the water, and you start creating carbonic acid. It changes the pH of water. A lot of the organisms right down at the bottom of the food chain, the calcifying organisms that make their shells, make their structures out of calcium carbonate, can't do that in a more acidic ocean. So you change the acidic level of the water, all these things at the bottom of your food chain die off because they can't create them, and then that has knock-on effects on everything above it because the food is gone, you know, the things that are at the bottom of the food chain. So ocean acidification is another scary one. The thermal hyaline circulation.
There's loads of ways for us to die.
Yeah, we're talking about assisted suicide. You might be on the phone to Dignitas after this. But the thermal hyaline circulation is this major sort of conveyor belt that transfers all sorts of things, nutrients, minerals, even heat around all the world's oceans, and it's driven a lot by, you know, ocean salinity, and most importantly the difference in temperature between the equator and the Arctic or the poles. If you start changing that temperature, so the Arctic is warming a lot faster than the rest of the world. If you get rid of this gradient in temperature, you can maybe shut down this thermal hyaline circulation, which would be disastrous for pretty much everything in the oceans. You know, the bottom waters and the deep waters in the ocean would no longer upwell. You'd no longer get these minerals coming out, and you just have this dead black oxygenless environment at the bottom of the ocean where nothing could live. But these things are extremely rare. They are extremely unlikely, not rare. So these are worst case scenarios. If we do nothing, we continue business as usual, we just keep going at it and burying our heads in the sand, it can be extremely bad. I would say it's not likely to be that bad, but maybe I'm just optimistic with it.
So what are the ways we could actually help change?
Recycle.
I don't have a great answer for this, because if I did, I'd be a very rich person. But personally, I'm a big fan of carbon capture and sequestration, especially in a country like ours in Scotland. I think this is something that we're not using enough of by a long way. So this is sucking carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it somewhere. So I think in Scotland we're uniquely placed to sort of lead the world in this. I think we've got areas that are really suitable, that we've taken oil out of. So oils have these capstones that can stops the oil going up. These are areas in rocks that we could bury carbon dioxide or inject carbon dioxide back into. So we already have the infrastructure, we have all the drilling rigs and the oil rigs out there. We already have a workforce that can work on these. It's got the skills that we require. We need to create carbon capture centres, and we can buy carbon from other countries. You know, Scotland could lead the way in cleaning the world, suck the carbon dioxide out of the air, bury it into these rocks with the workforce we already have. So this is something that I think is very viable. There are problems with carbon capture. One of the most obvious is that if you create a power station that has a carbon capture machine on the top of it, it requires power, so you need more to get the same amount of power out of the power station. You need to be creating more power, so you're going to burn through your fossil fuels quicker. And this would be a way to allow us to keep using fossil fuels as well, but they are going to run out at some point. It's just the nature of them. So it's, you know, a temporary solution. But I think carbon capture doesn't get the attention that it should.
So that's basically one of the best ways you feel, sort of thing.
Yeah, again, I'm in no way an expert on it. It's something that I think is viable, and I think it could be done. There are people looking into it. You know, supposedly there was a lot of carbon capture centres that were shut down in favour of nuclear power by a Tory government. Again, Lib Dems are quite keen on the idea of exploring carbon capture. And I think it would be something that Scotland could do particularly well. So I wish we were doing more of that.
It's interesting. That's something I've never heard before, so it's interesting.
CCS, carbon capture and sequestration. The problem is storing it. Where do you put it? So oil fields are a great idea, but there's also, if you end up with a leak, imagine if you created all this carbon capture technology, you had this idea, you're going to put it into the ground, you start pumping carbon dioxide and you figure out there's a leak you've not noticed, and it's just going back into the atmosphere. Everything you've done is just a complete waste of time. So they have to be very confident about where they're putting it, but burying it back in rocks is my preferred solution. With the carbon cycle, you've got this sort of rapid section. So you've got the atmosphere, or the shallow waters, you've got the atmosphere, and you've got the biosphere. And you get a rapid change of carbon between these. So keeping it in that rapid system is no use. The things that take it out of that system are what we call the biological pump that takes it down to the bottom of the oceans and turns it into rocks. Or in the case of our fossil fuels, it was plants that didn't degrade. So when a tree takes in carbon dioxide, but when it dies, it releases the same amount of carbon dioxide that it's taken in over its lifespan. So trees are not going to solve the problem unless you can stop them decomposing and releasing this back into the atmosphere. So we need some way of putting it back into the geology that we took it out of and taking it out of that rapid section of the carbon cycle. So that's how you solve it, is taking it out of that rapid section.
Sure, you can work on someone for that.
Well, yeah, it's
there's a lot of work being done. You know, there's a lot of people way more informed about this than me. It's not something I've just dreamt up. You know, that, you know, I've read bits and pieces of what other people who really understand it are doing to try and promote this. Yeah.
Excellent. There you go. Cool.
So yeah, climate change, real. We know why it's happening. We know it's caused by us, and we know it's likely to be negative.
Likely to be negative.
Yeah. There's no such thing as, you know, truth with a capital T in science. You can't say it is definitely going to be this every single time. You can say it's most likely to be every other time it has been. The evidence points to this, and in my opinion, the evidence very strongly suggests that it's us, it's happening, and it's going to be bad.
And there's no pros to this at all. There's just all cons. Like people say, like, oh, taps it off like that, like that'll be great. But there's just no pros.
There's more chance of us getting more storms and shit.
It's just ridiculous.
If we didn't get killed by heating to death, we're going to get killed by a big fucking storm hitting us.
This is another totally complex area which is often sort of misrepresented. So there isn't actually any evidence that a change in the global average temperature is going to increase the amount of storms that we get.
Oh, cool, just shut the fucking idea.
But what the evidence does suggest is that the storms that we do have will have more energy and will be more powerful. So we might not just see a change in frequency, but we'll see a change in intensity. Again,
so I'm not a total piece of shit.
No. And you know, it's you know, a pretty you know, fine line. You know, what you said isn't wrong. It's just, you know, there's a wee bit of a modification to it to you know, reflect what the best evidence we have shows.
I'm not an expert on this subject.
No, me neither, not by any stretch. But you said benefits, so there does seem to be a greening of the planet.
I was joking about that, but on you go.
Yeah, so it does seem that we're seeing more plants in areas that we maybe haven't in before. So the greening of deserts, things like that, because plants benefit from CO2 quite a lot. It's likely that we might see some crop plants benefit from CO2. Although again, it gets really complex because temperature and precipitation also have a massive effect on crops. So CO2 is a benefit for crops. Too much temperature and changing water patterns is a negative. So it's not always going to be a good thing. But there are lots of areas where you can say, well, there might be a benefit here, and we don't really know how it's going to happen. So I wouldn't say it's all bad. And I would say food availability, you know, they talk about adaptive capacity, the ability to adapt to different temperatures, and they reckon that food security or food availability is quite a high adaptive capacity. So unless you see massive changes in temperature, I don't think we're all going to starve.
But surely the cons outweigh the pros.
Oh, definitely, aye.
In my opinion, definitely.
Right. Fuck for that.
Which you mean, like, fuck, no, we want it to be the other way. No, I don't want climate change to be real.
But it's good to know that you're right.
So yeah, there could be some benefits, but I think they're limited.
Definitely, aye.
If you're in,
there you go.
Okay, it's really complicated. Sorry, I'm tripping myself up here. But if you're in somewhere like Canada, or if you're in somewhere like Iceland, you know, where it's really hard to grow stuff, you start warming, you might find major benefits through, you know, locally. There might be a benefit to Iceland becoming less covered in ice and more suitable to grow in. Canada might see, you know, areas that are covered in permafrost just now being opened up and being suitable areas to produce crops. We might see an increase in food. You know, nothing's certain.
But that's like hundreds and hundreds of years ahead sort of thing, like if that was taken in.
I'm not sure. I don't know of a time scale, but a lot of these things are already happening just now. You can already see, you know, changes in temperature in Iceland that are going up. So you're seeing less of this permafrost, or some of the permafrost is beginning to melt, which has other knock-on effects and stuff as well.
We've been on 2 hours.
Have we?
Shit, is it?
Sorry.
Oh, shit. That's alright, it's
5 past 8.
Right.
So
Right, that's cool. Right.
I think we'll probably end.
Alright, that's cool. Well, we'll say goodbye and thank you for everybody for coming in, man. Much appreciated. You as well, Craig. Thanks for coming in.
There
you go. Cheers very much. Cheerio.